Chapter 1201, Acquisitioners. This iron skewer was different compared to the skewer Xu Qing had left behind on the revered ancient mainland. First of all, it looked different. His revered ancient iron skewer looked like a golden Vajra scepter. It didn't look very much at all like it had looked when Xu Qing originally started using it. This one looked exactly like his original iron skewer. It was long and thin, with an extremely sharp tip. That said, you couldn't necessarily say that this new one was stronger than the other. After all, his original iron skewer had been refined many times. Master Seventh himself had personally worked on it, and it also had a spirit automaton. It had the capacity to do all sorts of things. The main limitation had been Xu Qing's cultivation base, which held him back from unleashing its true potential. But in terms of suitability, this new skewer perfectly conformed to Xu Qing's cannon. Right now, cannon was the most important part of Xu Qing's battle prowess, and an iron skewer with his own cannon in it was obviously the perfect cannon treasure for him. By means of his cannon, it could enter overlapping universes, traverse multiple spacetimes, and form a perfect resonance with him. Most importantly, it was true and real, and thanks to the resonance, wasn't just stronger than expected, but could transpose with Xu Qing, so that when he used his cannon, he could act much more effectively. What was more, it had the Mode of Heaven's principle in it, which meant that the skewer had immensely high personhood, and was also extremely heavy. It was so heavy that even quasi-immortals would have to respect it. In the final analysis, this iron skewer definitely deserved to be called the most powerful cannon treasure Xu Qing could possibly have. No one else would even be able to wield it. If someone else even touched it, they would be sucked into space-time and encounter infinite timelessness. Only someone as strong as a lower immortal could possibly deal with it. The old man in red had added a few extra ingredients to the iron skewer and was clearly very pleased with the results. Not a bad treasure. At the very least, it will boost your battle prowess a few times over. He waved his hand, and the iron skewer thrummed as it flew out of the fire pit and toward Xu Qing. It stopped in front of Xu Qing, where it hovered motionless. Filled with excitement, Xu Qing reached out and grabbed the skewer. Given how familiar he was with wielding an iron skewer, as soon as it landed on his palm, he connected to it mentally. The skewer and its kaleidoscopic spacetime projections disappeared. It immediately formed a resonance with his spacetime cannon, and it immediately started to power up. Xu Qing was very pleased with what he could sense from it. Clasping hands, he bowed deeply to the old man in the red robe. "Many thanks, Senior. Might I ask to know your most honored name and surname, so that I can engrave this kindness on my heart for all time?" Xu Qing was thanking this lower immortal from the depths of his heart, in all sincerity. Not only had he fixed his Sage Heaven pagoda, but also, he had forged a truly precious treasure. He had even added some of his own, personal ingredients into the mix. Xu Qing knew that he had been treated with immense grace. "There's no need for that, it was all well-deserved. You can just call me True Monarch Jiusi," the old man smiled. "I'm Lin Shen's second elder brother, too." Xu Qing was stunned as he realized what that meant. Lower immortals were addressed as monarchs. But True Monarch was a special title that only the apprentices of an immortal lord would be given. Xu Qing now knew who this person was. Zhou Linshan was the actual name of immortal fairy spirit Phoenix. "My junior sister sent word to us, her elder brothers, and asked us to take good care of you. Going forward, if you need any help from me, just come here to the Deaforge universe. Now, be off with you." True Monarch Jiusi waved his hand, and the surroundings blurred. When Xu Qing could see clearly again, he was no longer in the forge, but rather, out on one of the bands of light. There were a lot of cultivators in the area, but it was a different band of light than he had left from. This one contained people who were leaving the forge with their completed equipment. Xu Qing turned and looked at the forge. He bowed again. In his heart, he felt true gratitude. His journey to the Aurora Immortal Palace had involved helping young Lord Aurora and immortal fairy spirit Phoenix to complete the marriage that had been interrupted by fate. Those scenes remained in his mind like lingering incense. And then, here in the Nine Shores Heaven, they once again stirred. I wonder where they are now. As he thought back to how everything had played out, he wished them well. Then he turned to leave. He had previously assumed this errand would take a long time, but things had gone very smoothly, leaving him a lot of extra time. I might as well take a trip to the heroic immortal tombs as well. Having made his decision, he took out the immortal slip and prepared to teleport to the heroic immortal tombs. However, that was when he suddenly heard some familiar voices, causing his eyebrows to shoot up. Instead of teleporting away, he chose to fly in the direction of the voices. The voices were getting louder. This is bullying, outrageous bullying. Who do you think we two brothers are? Dirt beneath your feet. That's right. Insulting us two brothers is equivalent to insulting all of the Ascendees. It's equivalent to insulting our master, who is none other than Sword Immortal Blue Mallard. And it's equivalent to insulting everyone from the Sword Immortal School. The speakers were none other than the sword cultivators, Hordeslayer and Rampart. Well, here we are and here are our swords. The two brothers were calling on all of their influence as they shouted in rage at three people blocking their path. The three people were dressed alike in a garment called a 100-pocket robe. The 100-pocket, part of the name, was literal. Each gray robe had a total of 100 pockets, and just a glance at them was enough to determine that those pockets were dimensional holding spaces that could be filled with entire cosmoses. The three people were also surrounded by a faint aura of death. They were not the source of it, but rather had been around so much death that it had stuck to them. They all had different facial features, but there was something about the temperament that seemed similar. It was a feeling like that of a jackal. It was a sinister greed that seemed to come instinctively to them. In terms of cultivation base, two of them were peak imperial sovereigns, while the one standing in the middle was a quasi-immortal. In response to Hordeslayer and Rampart yelling at them, they merely grinned nonchalantly. As for the quasi-immortal, he dug into his ear with his pinky finger, blew the tip of his finger clean, and chuckled. Of course I'm aware that you're Ascendees. Unfortunately, who around here isn't an Ascendee? Guess what? We also ascended only a few times ago. Furthermore, while it's true that the sects from the immortal capital have connections here, that counts for everybody. Besides, we just want to have a little talk with the two of you. We want to buy those swords, that's all. If you don't want to sell, that's fine. We're not going to force you. That said, we have a big responsibility, and we do have the right to conscript people into our forces. I'm just asking you two to cooperate. Unfortunately, you don't have the option of refusing. Hordeslayer and Rampart scowled. Quite a few cultivators in the area were looking on and discussing the scene playing out. Look at the clothes those three are wearing. They're obviously a bunch of greedy acquisitioners. HMPH, the Department of Acquisitions, is full of jackals. They run amok in universe after universe under the guise of collecting funds for the war. They're hated wherever they go. What's worse is that the envoy squadrons usually have dozens or even hundreds of cultivators in them. They're all corrupt scumbags, but they're also very united. Ordinary folk like us don't dare provoke them. That's exactly what's happening right here. Those three jackals took a liking to those two brothers' swords, except the brothers won't sell. And since they're new Ascendees, the acquisitioners are going to conscript them. If they get conscripted, they probably won't be killed outright, but they won't be able to keep their immortal swords. It was obvious from the chatter that the Department of Acquisitions had a horrible reputation, and that no one was willing to step in. Hordeslayer and Rampart were very nervous. They had just arrived here and hadn't had time to connect with any fellow disciples who were also Ascendees. And they knew that if they left the Nine Shores Heaven, it would be like going from the river out into the sea. In the fifth star ring, fighting was permitted according to the law. If they weren't strong enough to defend their immortal swords, then it would be a simple case of the weak falling prey to the strong. At the moment, it would be hard for them to feel more anxious. Xu Qing could see that the swords were drawn and the arrows were nocked, and that conflict would break out any moment. As he stood unnoticed in the crowd, he considered the situation and tried to decide whether or not to interfere. After all, those two swords were at least in some way his. Before he could make a decision, a domineering beam of light appeared from off in the distance. Within the beam of light was a young man wearing a black robe with flowing black hair. He had a cold facial expression and pulsed with the aura of a quasi-immortal. Surrounding him were numerous chains of order. He immediately attracted a lot of attention. He was Sir Star Ring. His purpose in coming was not to provide assistance. He had come to get his magical treasure and just happened to be passing by. As he neared, his domineering aura, which he made no effort to conceal, caused the eyes of Hordeslayer and Rampart to shine. Without any hesitation, they started calling out to him. "Greetings, eldest brother. Eldest brother, we need your help." The use of the address, eldest brother, was forced but appropriate. As the anxious Hordeslayer and Rampart bowed formally, Sir Star Ring stopped in place. He frowned. This matter had nothing to do with him. At a glance, he could tell what was happening, and he had no intention of interfering. But before he could do anything, Hordeslayer and Rampart flew over and cowered behind him. If he left now, it would come across as him being scared. Sir Star Ring felt a bit irritated, but his eyes remained cold as he looked at the 3 cultivators in 100-pocket robes who were now rushing after Hordeslayer and Rampart. He suddenly surged with a quasi-immortal aura. The 3 acquisitioners stopped in place. The 2 who were Imperial Sovereign had serious looks on their faces, but the quasi-immortal's eyes were narrowed. They didn't advance any further. Seeing that, Sir Star Ring looked away from them and flew off into the distance. Hordeslayer and Rampart breathed sighs of relief as they followed. The 3 of them soon disappeared in the distance. Everyone else present looked on with glittering eyes. As for the quasi-immortal acquisitioner, he suddenly said, "He must be the first-place ascendee. I guess we underestimated this group. They have some really impressive people. Let's go figure out who that guy is." Quite a long time ago, I posted some pics of what the upgraded skewer looked like in the form of a golden Vajra scepter. In case you'd like a refresher, here are the pics. 2. This is a very unique name, and once I saw it, I felt like my mind was being struck by 10 million lightning bolts. And sure enough, the Chinese readers in the comments section reacted the same way. There were a ton of comments on this paragraph. Everyone seemed to agree that this person is likely Qi Jiusi from I Shall Seal the Heavens. The name is just too unusual and specific to be randomly used by the author. Qi Jiusi was in too many chapters to list them out, but I can tell you he first appeared by name in chapter 567. That chapter also has the explanation of his name, which is very meaningful. If it's true, and this old man really is Qi Jiusi, and he was also a true monarch and Lin Shen's second elder brother, well, I'm still trying to wrap my mind about all the implications. Chapter 1202, Seeing a God Again. What Xu Qing saw on his way out of the Deaforge universe was a little interlude and nothing more. Sir Star Ring showed up, and thus, Xu Qing didn't end up revealing himself. Hordeslayer, Rampart, and even Sir Star Ring himself were merely passing travelers to him. At the very most, he might end up taking the 2 swords if the need arose one day. However, the 3 evil cultivators Hordeslayer and Rampart had run into were of note to Xu Qing. 2 were Imperial Sovereigns, and 1 was a quasi-immortal. It was obvious how greedy and domineering they were. Xu Qing had never been under the illusion that everyone with a high cultivation base had some sort of transcendent personality. In the chiliocosm of worlds, there was no end to the cultivators that existed. Powerful experts were as numerous as clouds in the sky, and it was only natural that they would have all sorts of personalities. And of course, they would act differently and hold themselves to different standards. Some people were sinister, some were extraordinary. There were broad-minded people like Grand Emperor Swordsage, and of course, there would be greedy and evil people like those he had just seen. It was the same even in the quasi-immortal level. People were people, and they all had different personalities. There were many quasi-immortals in the 5th star ring, largely because of the different environment. It wasn't like the revered ancient mainland, where life was tough and the resources were scarce. In revered ancient, quasi-immortals and even imperial sovereigns were as rare as phoenix feathers or Killin horns. The higher you climbed, the more mountains you encountered. The further you traveled, the more scenery you saw. It was just how things worked. When all was said and done, personality was largely the result of one's experiences. There were some people who lived for thousands or tens of thousands of years, and who experienced all the joy and sorrow of life that eventually became numb, blank, and returned to their primal state. Otherwise, it would be hard to escape the colorful reality of human nature. Of course, in some cases, one couldn't just take things at face value. In the end, Xu Qing wasn't surprised at all to find some powerful experts, and even a quasi-immortal who would try to rob others in public. But what he did find surprising was who those three people were. Acquisitioners for some war. Xu Qing was lost in thought as he left. What was especially noteworthy was the mention of war. They acquire resources for war. What war is the 5th star ring fighting? Maybe with another star ring. Xu Qing thought about it for a moment. There were some things that you wouldn't be able to see clearly until you reached the proper vantage point and had a wide view. Up to this point, Xu Qing had not been aware of any war being fought by or in the 5th star ring. However, listening to the conversations of the other cultivators had given him an idea of what was going on. I suppose things will be made clear in the reception universe. With such thoughts in his mind, he crushed the immortal slip for the heroic immortal tombs and vanished in a teleportation. The starry sky blurred. The heroic immortal tombs didn't just exist in the Nine Shores heaven. Similar things existed in all of the heavens beyond heaven. From ancient times until now, whenever immortals fell in battle, they would be buried somewhere. In some cases, their corpses were interred intact. In the vast majority of cases, their remains were mangled. In some cases, the only thing left behind was a grave marker. The heroic immortal tombs were located in the heroic immortal star domain in the immortal eulogy universe. It was isolated by unique barriers, and the only entrance was an immense ancient door made of bronze. Outside of the door was a black stone staircase of the most ancient construction. Seated right in front of the door at the top of the staircase was an old man in a black robe. He was nothing special to look at, and his aura was imperceptible as he sat there motionless. When Xu Qing materialized, he was on the stairs outside the door. He looked up at the huge door and then at the old man, and his heart trembled. There was a strong feeling of death coming from the old man, as well as a sensation of lonely bleakness. The sight caused his cannon to ripple, as if it were being drawn to the old man. At the same time, a host of information filled him. He suddenly got the feeling that this old man shouldn't exist, and yet did exist. The feeling grew very strong before vanishing. After hesitating for a moment, he bowed. Then he walked up the stairs and disappeared into the door. After Xu Qing was gone, the old man opened his eyes. He lifted a flagon of alcohol and took a drink. Looking at the door, he hoarsely murmured, "Nobody has come for a while now. That's good. There have been few memorial services, but that just means not many people have died in the war recently. That's excellent. All of you are long gone. Why did you leave me behind guarding your tombs here in the mortal world?" The old man's eyes seemed to fill with reminiscence. Upon stepping through the door, the starry sky again blurred to Xu Qing, and when things became clear, he was looking at a host of galaxies. They were tombs. In the heroic immortal star domain, each galaxy was a tomb. Each one had a stone stele above it inscribed with writing. In some cases, the writing told the life story of the individual interred therein. In other cases, there were only a few words written down. In the case of the latter, it was usually an epitaph explaining the ideals of the buried individual. There weren't many galaxies. There were only a bit more than 100. That said, this was a place of buried immortals. In other words, from ancient times until now, there had only been a bit more than 100 lower immortals who had perished in battle in the Nine Shores heaven. Xu Qing knew that history went back for countless years. But to walk through that huge door and see all these galaxies, and the stone steles above them, left him feeling deeply shaken. He could just barely make out a sound like a sigh, echoing through the starry sky. It was like the battle cry of a valiant warrior drifting amongst the galaxies. It was like a blessing from the eons, lingering among death. They had defended their home. They had defended their people. They had fought heroically for humankind and their star ring. They risked life and limb with no thought given to their personal interest. Even though Xu Qing wasn't native to the fifth star ring, he felt his mood sinking. He couldn't help but feel deep reverence for the heroism these people had shown. The stone steels he was looking at became inscribed on his heart. After a moment passed, he began to pass amidst the swirling stars and look at the stone steels. I practiced cultivation for 9,000 years. I hailed from Grand Immortal Mountain, practiced cloud cultivation, and when I became an immortal, I was given the title Immortal Monarch. During my life, I cut down 7 true gods. I couldn't be prouder. I was a rogue cultivator who refused to give up. I eventually rose to the level of immortal, and in the Star Ring War, I participated in the God Lord Siege. Though I died, I had no regrets. Spirits become gods, beasts become specters, ghosts become freaks. In that case, what is an immortal? When a human becomes a mountain, all to defend humankind, well, that person is an immortal. 1. I lived for too long and began to lose my humanity. I could not kill any true gods, but I wanted to accomplish something, so I went hunting. I planned to kill as many altar god chosen as I could, and sever the lineage of whatever gods I found. Later generations of cultivators shall not come to offer respects empty-handed. I require the blood of gods. Offer some to me. As Xu Qing went from stone steel to stone steel and read the script, he felt like he heard people laughing heartily. In other cases, he heard weeping or even insane babble. It was like a great river of history flowing past him. The stone steels and their inscriptions linked past, present, and future into an indelible marking. Anyone who came here would be moved. It was pure poetry. The Green Mountains are full of loyal bones. The annals of history record the mighty deeds. The spirit of the heroes fills heaven and earth. The illustrious names will be spoken of throughout the ages. 2. Eventually, Xu Qing settled down cross-legged in the middle of the starry sky and looked around at all the stone steels. Seniors, I am Xu Qing. I'm not a native of the fifth star ring, but I promise I won't let you down. Is there any of you willing to give me some of your inheritance? I promise to never give up on my ideals. The response was silence. Nothing stirred. Xu Qing settled his energy, cleared his mind, and began to seek enlightenment. Nothing happened. He frowned, and after some thought, decided not to seek enlightenment. Instead, he let his thoughts expand. Gradually, he began to recall the past. His youth had been a struggle. After growing up, he faced endless slaughter. He faced the evil of the gods. He encountered the wrath of the gods. But when the Empress reached godly ascension, he gained an understanding amidst the confusion. And that was when he realized what the real question was. It was as if a voice was asking him, "What are the gods?" In the past, Xu Qing had been able to answer succinctly. But now that he thought about the question again and considered Empress Summer departure, he suddenly spoke in a calm voice. The vast majority of gods are sons of bitches like they've always been, but there are some of them who are still human. The stone steels began vibrating. 1. This entire passage is full of wordplay that doesn't translate perfectly. He basically takes 2-character descriptions of things like gods, ghosts, etc., and breaks them up into their component characters to describe them. The point of the last part is something Gen readers have seen before in other novels. The character for immortal Chinese letter has the character for person man, human on the left Chinese letter, and the character for mountain on the right Chinese letter. In this particular passage, the Chinese letter character is associated specifically with the word for humankind or humans as a species. 2. As far as I can tell, this poem is an invention of the author, although it contains some common poetic phrases. Chapter 12:03, More Human Than Many Humans. It wasn't just the stone steels that reacted. The more than 100 galaxies began to shine with dazzling light. Apparently, the sentiment Xu Qing had just expressed was not considered enlightened in the fifth star ring. Streams of divine will emerge from the stone steels, along with voices. Preposterous. Gods are just gods. How could they be human? It doesn't matter if you're talking about pre-heaven gods or all of those post-heaven gods. Anyone who chooses the path of the gods has forfeited their humanity. What you have seen and felt is simply a part of the process of God cultivation. The gods are more than willing to fool you to make progress easy. You are not the first to be scammed by the gods, nor will you be the last. Young one, take some advice. Don't let them fool you. From ancient times until now, all who befriend the gods end up regretting that decision. There are no exceptions. Now, take back what you said, and I'll give you some of my inheritance. The streams of divine will echoed in the star domain, entering Xu Qing's heart and mind. Xu Qing didn't say anything. His eyes contained reminiscence. After some more thought, he made his decision. The remains of the immortals here had no souls, and what he was hearing wasn't actual divine will. It was more like the lingering obsession of the immortals who had died in battle. They had fought gods their entire lives. From birth to death, they had stood in opposition to them. And thus, from their point of view, gods really were all the same. Xu Qing used to think in the same way, but then he had witnessed Empress Summer Departure reach godly ascension, and that had changed his worldview. Seniors, he said calmly, where I come from there are things called holy lands. When the gods wreaked havoc, my people, even the children, were infected by the mutagen of the gods. And you know what the humans in the holy lands did? They didn't care about us. They left. They abandoned humankind. They were so high and mighty that it didn't bother them at all that other humans were dying. And then their descendants came back and continued to exploit and manipulate things from behind the scenes. Over time, humans fell into decline. One emperor after another shed blood, sweat, and tears to keep humans safe. And then there was Grand Emperor Swordsage, who sacrificed everything to defend us. Despite all that, humans struggled to survive, much less rise to prominence. Countless humans became food for non-humans. They suffered in bitterness. I have seen things worse than even cannibalism. Our species struggled in the darkness, gradually losing touch with our humanity until we were on the verge of being wiped out. But then someone came along within that tribulation and destruction. She was the empress of the humans back at my home. Unfortunately, her ideals were vanquished, and in the end, she had only two choices: either let humans be wiped out, or become a god. In the end, she chose godly ascension. Was it rebellious? Heretical? Did it besmirch the ancestral edicts? Maybe, but she chose to shoulder the responsibility. She said that she didn't care if the Holy Lands were populated by humans. She was going to do everything to make sure that the Joss flame of humankind still burned in revered ancient. She said that humans deserved to be happy, and if heaven and earth wouldn't do it for humankind, she would. So she would bring peace to humans in revered ancient. She said that she didn't care about living forever. She just wanted humans to have a chance to flourish. And once again, be glorious in revered ancient. She said that she wasn't becoming a god for her own sake, and she brought all of the old emperors with her to also reach godly ascension. She said that the 5 old emperors would be zombie gods. They would lack thinking faculties, but they would have godly might. And then she drew on the destiny aura of humankind to defend the last bastion of humankind and strike fear into the hearts of the non-humans. She said she would become a human god to safeguard humankind and bring peace for generations to come. And lastly, she said that she knew her actions would result in karma that would bring catastrophe and tribulation. But she would bear sole responsibility. 1. Xu Qing's words echoed out into the star domain. They contained all of his reminiscence and all of the emotions he felt. He used his words and voice to paint a detailed picture of the heroic spirits, describing how and why Empress Summer Departure became a god. In the end, he looked around at the stone steels. As far as I'm concerned, a god like that is more human than many humans. I also know that not all gods are like that, but humans can also be good and evil. It's the same with gods. It doesn't matter how many there are that are good. They do exist. And that's why I'm not going to change my mind. Ducking his head, Xu Qing clasped hands and bowed. Afterward, the galaxies and the star domain all seemed to emanate pure coldness. The stone steels didn't vibrate, and the words on them disappeared from view. As for inheritances and legacies, not one came out. They did not agree with Xu Qing's opinion, and thus, they had nothing further to say. Xu Qing quietly turned. He was not disappointed at the results. One needed to walk one's own path in life, and the scenery one would inevitably encounter on the way would mold one's way of thinking. It would mold one's view of life, one's understanding of the world, and one's perception of things living and inanimate. All of that would converge into a unique way of thinking. That was what it meant to be human. Going forward, Xu Qing would still kill gods. He would still rob them and treat them cold-bloodedly. But there were some gods, such as the Empress, whom he would fight for, because he knew that, in her heart, the Empress was not a god. She was human, and she was more human than many humans. It was with such thoughts, and without any regrets, that Xu Qing calmly walked toward the door. He was ready to go back to the Ink Sun universe and wait until the time came for his formal reception into the Nine Shores heaven. But as he neared the door, and just before he stepped through it, the door trembled loudly. A somber, killing aura began to pulse from it. Xu Qing stopped in place, his gaze hardening. Someone was coming through the door. In fact, it wasn't a single person. It was over 100. They all wore unique suits of armor that were stained with blood, both the blood of gods and their own blood. They looked exhausted, and deep down inside, full of sorrow. They approached silently. Amidst this procession were a dozen or so cultivators carrying a huge coffin. Draped atop the coffin was the flag of the 5th star ring. Xu Qing quietly stepped to the side to make way. None of the cultivators paid any attention to him. They sorrowfully made their way off into the distance. As Xu Qing watched them pass, he could sense sorrow, but more than that, desolation. That desolation didn't come when cultivators fought and killed each other. It was something Xu Qing was familiar with. It was the powerful desolation that built up on soldiers when they spent time on the field of battle. These people had come from the war. As for who rested in the coffin, Xu Qing could guess who it was. It definitely contained the remains of an immortal. An immortal had died on the field of battle and was being sent here for a hero's burial. Xu Qing felt more somber than ever. Off in the stance, the procession stopped. They all bowed as the coffin was sent forth, and they began to sing an ancient song of mourning. The lyrics seemed to tug at the soul. It was a eulogy, and as the lyrics drifted out, stars appeared, like sand or dirt that covered the coffin. Soon it wasn't visible. The sand of stars then turned into a galaxy, and a stone stele appeared above it. The cultivators stood, and the leader amongst them saluted. "Rest in peace, immortal monarch." After the soldier passionately bade farewell, they turned somberly and left. After all of this happened, Xu Qing didn't just leave. He went over to the galaxy where the heroic immortal had just been laid to rest. After bowing, he looked at the inscription on the stone stele. "Life is like a dream, and time is like a song. The starry sea eventually comes to an end. I am immortal monarch spirit Jade. I eradicated a true god and drank Hai's blood. I wiped out Hai's mark like the turtle dove occupying the magpie's nest. Let's see what happens in the future. Will it be he who returns or me? If he returns, my corpse will emanate golden light, and later generations can erase the true god from existence. But if it's me, then silver light will shine, and I will slay gods again." This immortal seemed different than the others. He seemed to be attempting to use the natural laws governing gods to effectuate his own return. Eyes shining, Xu Qing was about to investigate further when he heard a sigh from behind him. Looking over his shoulder, he saw a stooped old man who was the guard from outside. The old man approached and stood in front of the stele. "We've reached the next stage of the war. There are going to be a lot more heroic spirits here soon. According to what I heard, this one had been searching his whole life for an explanation about why true gods are undying." The old man sighed. Xu Qing backed up a few steps, then bowed thoughtfully. "Senior, what's the war about?" The old man turned and looked at him deeply. "When the rain falls, it falls on everyone equally. But if one party doesn't feel the rain, it indicates that someone has gone out of their way to prevent the rain from falling on them. Immortal Lord Deepgloom is that person. He is stationed on the border, preventing the fourth star ring from invading. It's a star ring war, but also a war between gods and immortals. The old man looked off into the distance. He lifted his hand, within which was a bell that lacked a bell clapper. It seemed ordinary in nature, but its mere presence caused colorful ripples to spread through the starry sky. I had a good friend who died in the war, killed by a god lord. Though he perished, and this treasure of his was damaged, it survived in this state. It contains the might of a god lord. He wanted me to find someone connected to him by destiny and pass it on to them. Xu Qing's eyes narrowed as he looked at the old man. The old man waved his hand, and the bell floated over to Xu Qing. He turned and started walking off. I heard what you said, and I greatly admire that empress you mentioned. We live in a complicated world, and human nature is complicated. Don't care too much what others think. I'm confident that if these old friends of mine were actually alive, they would understand. Unfortunately, all that's left behind here are remnants of their obsession and their will to defy the gods. An outstanding person like you shouldn't leave here empty-handed. Take that as a gift from me. The old man disappeared, leaving behind a few words. I've met gods like those you described, those who are more human than many humans. 1. Xu Qing is summarizing the Empress words from chapters 951 and 952. In some cases, the wording is very similar, in others not. So it comes across more like him telling his version, rather than reciting exactly what she said. Chapter 12:04, Prohibition. Upon leaving the heroic immortal tombs, Xu Qing listened to his heart and gazed in the direction he imagined was where the 9th star ring lay. It was a haze of stars, and truth be told, he had no idea if the 9th star ring really was in that direction. He had a clone in revered ancient, and he could sense it, but it was so incredibly far away that it was little more than a vague feeling. But though he couldn't see anything, or even be certain that he was looking toward the 9th star ring, he knew why he felt inclined to do this. He missed home. He missed the revered ancient mainland. He missed the people there, and the things there, and everything. The day is going to come when revered ancient is like here in the 5th star ring. The mutagen will be gone, and immortal energy will fill the place. The gods there will change their Tao and abandon the cultivation of gods. Eventually, he looked away. It wasn't time to leave yet. He still needed to get stronger. He had not yet reached the point where he could go back to keep anyone safe or change anything. Soon. Collecting his thoughts, he took out his Ink Sun Universe Immortal slip and squeezed it. Everything blurred, and ripples spread out as the teleportation began. Majestic spatial power was required to perform inter-universe teleportations. It also required the support of high-level canon. Neither could be lacking. When both qualifications were met, cultivators in the Nine Shores heaven could go through with such teleportations. Given the current level of Xu Qing's cultivation base, he did have a good understanding of space, but his view was limited. He had no way to see into the deeper levels. There are mysteries at play here. I suppose it has something to do with Immortal Lord Nineshores. Immortal lords were currently unfathomable to him. As a result, he could only vaguely make out bits and pieces of the whole. His vision blurred, and the void around him changed. The starry sky slowly transformed. When everything went back to normal, Xu Qing was no longer at the heroic immortal tombs. Instead, he was in his immortal hall on the asteroid in the Ink Sun universe. When he opened the doors of the hall, the Ink Sun universe stretched out in front of him. He took a step forward and vanished. When he reappeared, he was outside the inclined black hole. He saw Starfear lying there on a divan, enjoying life and surrounded by a host of dancing, chatting maidens. Upon noticing Xu Qing, she first looked surprised and then she pouted slightly. "Back so soon, you devil? Why didn't you let me know you were coming? I could have gotten ready. What is this supposed to be, a surprise inspection? Whatever. I'm not going to argue with you. Well, did things go smoothly?" Xu Qing had long since become immune to Starfare's flirting. Very smoothly. You can carry on. Xu Qing sat down cross-legged. Ignoring Starfear, he took out the gift the old man had given him and sent his divine will inside to study it. Seeing that Xu Qing was ignoring her caused Starfear to chuckle softly. She wasn't offended. He was used to dealing with her, and she had long since become used to dealing with him. She loved flirting, and she loved how he refused her. Within that relationship, she had managed to latch on to some of her human nature that had long since begun to disappear. It was happiness, and it reminded her that she was alive. Thus, she chose to ignore her godly nature and immerse herself in human nature. As the beautiful maidens around her danced, she glanced at Xu Qing sitting there. She smiled. She was surrounded by beautiful women, and she was sitting next to a beautiful man. This is the beautiful scenery I've built for myself. She was fully aware that she was different from Praheaven gods. Her human nature had not fully disappeared, nor did she want it to, and flirting with Xu Qing kept her human nature active. This is great. Starfear ate an immortal fruit, and her eyes narrowed into crescent moons of happiness and comfort. Time passed, months went by. Starfear felt wonderful that entire time. As for Xu Qing, he was immersed in studying the bell. It was made from a fantastic material. Despite performing many experiments, Xu Qing had been unable to leave even a scratch on it. Not even his canon of parallelism would work on it. It could not be sent to other spacetimes. There was some sort of force surrounding it that prevented it from leaving its own spacetime. I suppose it's what that guard said. It's a scrap of God Lord might. The owner of this item was killed by a God Lord, but the item itself was not destroyed. It was taken away and not seized by the God Lord. Unless the God Lord did that on purpose for some reason, it indicates this thing is extraordinary. That said, the bell has no clapper, but at least I learned a few things during the past couple months. His eyes glittered brightly. Though he had not been able to leave even a tiny mark on the bell using external force, by means of his immortal embryo, he was able to make a connection to the bell by nourishing it. At first, the connection wasn't very strong. The bell was masterless, and though it didn't exactly reject the nourishment he offered, it also didn't cooperate. It wasn't like parched dirt thirsty for even a drop of dew. But Xu Qing was cautious in the way he treated it. As he slowly provided nourishment, he gradually reached the point of being able to exercise some ownership over it. And when that happened, he seized that control and didn't let go. If he made the slightest mistake, the connection would sever. It seems to me that the key to unleashing the power of this treasure is going to be sound. Xu Qing waved his hand, and the iron skewer he had acquired in the Deaforge universe flew out, bright and glittering. Xu Qing had a good idea of how to deal with the bell. After reviewing his thought process to make sure he hadn't forgotten anything important, his face flashed with determination, and he sent the iron skewer to hit the side of the ball. The moment they made contact, the bell vibrated. The crisp but ethereal sound of a chiming bell echoed out. The cup of fine wine that Starfear had lifted to her lips suddenly collapsed into nothing. So did all the dancing maidens around. Starfear leaped up, only to stagger backward, her body blurring, revealing her god altar. Shocked, she said, "What is this thing?" Starfear wasn't the only one to react in that way. The entire starry sky shook. The bell echoed out infinitely, reaching into the minds of all living beings and echoed into all objects. The entire Ink Sun universe filled with the sound of the bell and nothing else. Within that silence, all illusions ceased to exist. All magical techniques collapsed, and all divine abilities shattered. Xu Qing was visibly moved. Now he knew what this bell treasure could do. It prohibits all magical arts, and given what just happened to Starfear, it seems gods fall under the umbrella of the prohibition as well. Unfortunately, once the sound of the bell vanished, everything went back to normal. The dancing and bustle around Starfire came back. The immortal fruit that had vanished once again appeared in her hand. At the moment, she wasn't interested in eating it. Looking seriously at Xu Qing, she said, "That treasure can prohibit gods." Xu Qing nodded. "It's actually a deadly weapon." Face filling with concentration, he continued studying the bell. After a long moment passed, Starfire sighed. Here in the 5th star ring, she had really come to understand what it meant to be terrified. Once he finishes his studies here, the kid's gonna go back to revered ancient and shake things up among the gods there. Well, who cares? What's that got to do with me? Starfire went back to enjoying herself. Time continued to pass. Xu Qing spent a few months in study, and then he focused on cultivation. He stabilized his immortal embryo and began laying the foundation for his next breakthrough. He was currently very stable in his existing state. Before long, the 1-year deadline approached. The day of reception was nearing. When the day came, a dignified voice drifted out from his universe's jade slip. All ascendees have 24 universe hours to check in at the reception universe and receive your new orders. You will be given permanent assignments in the Nine Shores heaven and will begin to truly assimilate here. The voice didn't just echo in Xu Qing's mind. It reached all of the ascendees. It didn't matter what universe they were in or what they were doing. All of them looked up with expressions that were both serious and full of anticipation. Xu Qing opened his eyes and stood. The time is here, finally. Starfire retracted all her magical arts, strolled over to Xu Qing and stretched. I've been idle for too long. Time for excitement. I've really been looking forward to this. Chapter 1205, Reception Universe. All of the new ascendees were given universes after entering the heaven beyond heaven, as well as a year to rest. That year was intended to give the new ascendees time to get familiar with the heaven beyond heaven, as well as their personal universe. They also had time to get their rewards. When the rest period ended, they were then summoned to the Nine Shores Heavens, Reception Universe. There, they would be told about the assignment that had been arranged for them. By the time Xu Qing got the message, he was already back at the Ink Sun Universe's Immortal Hall. Without any hesitation, he stepped onto the Immortal Hall's teleportation portal and began the teleportation. Starfire was now a special symbol sealed onto his arm. The Immortal Hall trembled as terrifying teleportation fluctuations rolled out through it. This teleportation took much longer than any Xu Qing had experienced before. Clearly, the Reception Universe was a great distance away from the Ink Sun Universe. He wasn't sure exactly how long it took, as the process was like a modeled dream. Within that dream, everything was blurry and colorful. Eventually, the distorted glow faded away, and he could see clearly again. Stretching out in front of him was a vast golden river. The river was made of innumerable star domains, countless star whirlpools, and uncountable planets. The planets all emanated a unique golden light. They didn't move. Rather, starlight flowed around them, which made it seem like they were in motion. It was Xu Qing's first time seeing a golden river of stars like this. This place was the Reception Universe. It was also one of the 72 centers of government in the Nine Shores Heaven, which were second only to the Immortal Palace in terms of power and authority. It controlled general operations in the Nine Shores Heaven, and during this epoch, it was the headquarters that oversaw the reception of visitors from other heavens beyond heaven. It didn't just receive new ascendees. It provided direction to the minor worlds under the 5th star ring, as well as the non-humans in all the star ring's various universes. It was like a military command center, and at the same time, a personnel coordination department. It went without saying that a lot of lower immortals were stationed there. As Xu Qing looked in astonishment at the majestic golden river, a stream of starlight emerged from it and shot toward him. The golden light was insignificant in comparison to the river as a whole, but as they neared, they seemed similarly majestic. The stream swirled around him and began to draw him toward the river. The golden starlight that had come out to receive Xu Qing originated in a location in the lower reaches of the Golden River, to a specific planet in a star whirlpool in a star domain. Streams of starlight were drawing people in from all over the Reception Universe. It happened to all cultivators who had teleported there, and depending on why they had come here, the light would lead them to different places. As the light tugged at Xu Qing, he shot toward the planet. He was moving so fast that he felt like he was being stretched out like a shooting star. In the shortest of moments, he was pulled from outside the star river to its interior. He entered a group of planets and eventually neared the one that he was being pulled toward. His view rapidly transformed. Everything started rumbling. And then he dropped onto a huge sea on the planet. The sea was black and viscous, almost like gelatin, and he had been tugged toward it at such incredible speed that he hit it with a great amount of force. Given the level of Xu Qing's cultivation base, he could deal with the force. However, a lower-level cultivator who experienced that impact would lose their soul and find their fleshly body crumbling. Of course, though his cultivation base was sufficient to avoid injury, when he hit the surface of the sea, he slammed down into it, all while creating a huge crater above him. A short time later, he struggled out of the crater and looked around. The sky was golden, and the black, viscous sea around him stretched on forever. Up in midair were other beams of golden starlight bringing other cultivators. Booms rang out on the surface of the sea. Soon, there were dozens of craters. Some of the cultivators slammed into the sea and then emerged looking bedraggled. A few even had to wipe blood from their mouths and had looks of lingering fear in their eyes. Xu Qing spotted Zhou Jingli in the crowd, as well as Sir Vilespirit, Li Mengtu, Yuan Su, Hordeslayer, and Rampart. Sir Star Ring was also there, who looked to be in much better shape than the other fellow ascendees. Almost as soon as Xu Qing looked at him, he turned and looked back. Their gazes met. Both remained expressionless. Time passed as more people arrived. Some people stuck to themselves, while others gathered in groups. People had obviously begun to form into factions over the past year, based on their experiences. Sir Vilespirit was still operating alone. Yuan Su had originally planned to stick to herself, but had been unable to avoid some of the other female ascendees, who had chosen to ally themselves with her. Hordeslayer and Rampart were sticking close to Sir Star Ring, as were a group of a few dozen other cultivators. The biggest group had gathered around Xu Qing. He had taken first place. So many people, upon spotting him, came over and cheerfully offered greetings. Zhou Jingli and Li Mengtu were among them. The former was acting like usual. Smiling, he offered an obsequious bow. The latter had a serious look on his face. Keeping his voice low, he said, "Brother Xu, it looks like 11 from our group have gone missing. I just counted, and there are only 89 people present." Xu Qing nodded. Zhou Jingli chuckled. "Dead, I suppose. We were given a year to rest and acclimate, but our star ring has always focused on raising venomous bugs in a jar, and thus." Ads by Pobrev. Zhou Jingli looked at Xu Qing. The truth was that Zhou Jingli had learned a lot about this heaven beyond heaven in the past year, and was on guard about what was to come. More than ever, he felt that it was important to maintain a good relationship with Xu Qing. Therefore, he opened his mouth and said, "Things aren't just brutal in the 4 great planetary systems. This entire heaven beyond heaven is very intense. To the higher-ups, only people who are truly important are those who have, at the very least, quasi-immortal battle prowess. In other words, you, young lord, as well as Sir Star Ring and Yuan Su. But that's it. Just you 3. Imperial sovereigns, well, the higher-ups don't care much about them. So, unless you have very good connections, advancing to a better position requires having a lot of resources and allying with a quasi-immortal." Zhou Jingli didn't bother to lower his voice when he said these things. The other ascendees in the area all heard him very clearly. All of them suddenly seemed very thoughtful. Xu Qing looked at Zhou Jingli. Zhou Jingli smiled back obsequiously. Xu Qing looked away and thought back to what Zhou Jingli had said to him the previous year. "My guess is that a year from now, the whole lot of us are going to get the same assignment." Xu Qing thought about it for a moment. Time passed as everyone waited. There were no other cultivators atop the vast sea. No one had come to receive them. But these were all extraordinary individuals, so none of them were going to get impatient being asked to wait. One by one, many of them sat down cross-legged. Another 2 hours went by. Eventually, a loud wind picked up, whereupon Xu Qing and Sir Star Ring both seemed to sense something. They looked up into the sky. Yuan Su was the third to notice what was happening. Everyone else, noticing the reaction of those three, did the same. The sky was rippling, and golden light had appeared. It was the same type of light that had drawn them to this planet. There were a total of 70 or 80 streams of it, with a handful of them in front of the others. Heaven and earth began to tremble. Only some of the cultivators in the group slammed into the surface of the sea and made craters. Most of them alighted stably on the water. They had been to this place before and had the skill to maintain control. All of these people were dressed the same way. They had on the same clothes that Xu Qing had first seen in the Deathblade universe. Each wore a gray 100-pocket robe. Those robes were the signature clothing of the notorious acquisitioners. There were 8 who were quasi-immortals, and they were obviously the leaders. After they landed, Xu Qing's expression didn't change, but many of the other ascendees suddenly looked very serious. The new arrivals looked at the gathered ascendees, particularly Xu Qing and the people surrounding him. Their gazes were like those of jackals. They seemed indifferent to life and full of unfeeling callousness. None of them said a word. Then their leaders shot off into the distance, followed by the others. "Young lord," Zhou Jingli said in a low voice, "they're acquisitioners. Presumably, we've been drawn to this planet because of them." Xu Qing nodded. However, things weren't over yet. After the time it takes an incense stick to burn, more golden light appeared in the sky. Again, dozens of cultivators arrived in 100-pocket robes. After landing on the sea, they raced away. In that manner, time passed. Group after group of acquisitioners arrived. None of them paid any attention to Xu Qing and the other ascendees. After observing them, Xu Qing realized that they all had cold, greedy auras. And the higher their cultivation base, the more obvious it was that they had corpse energy and death auras. The reek of gore was especially prominent. Clearly, these people had long-term contact with corpses and death. Eventually, when the golden light in the sky started to dim, another several dozen beams of light shot down and resolved into figures in front of them. The one in the lead had an extremely terrifying aura. He was an old man who resembled a vulture, and his immortal embryo was at the Great Circle. He was just a step away from being an immortal. Upon landing, he turned to lead everyone away. But then, a middle-aged cultivator in the group behind the old man stopped in place. Turning, he looked at Xu Qing and the others. And then, he looked behind Sir Star Ring, Hordeslayer, and Rampart. He smiled. Xu Qing had seen this person before. He was the very same quasi-immortal cultivator who had caused trouble for Hordeslayer and Rampart back in the Deathblade universe. His gaze came to rest on Sir Star Ring. Meanwhile, some of his fellows had stopped in place just like him. Hurrying over to the terrifying old man, the middle-aged cultivator said a few words. The old man frowned, but eventually nodded. With the old man's approval, the middle-aged quasi-immortal looked at Sir Star Ring and smiled. "I've lost a few members of my squadron in the war. I need to make up some numbers, so as of this moment, you 3 are conscripted." Chapter 1206, Unexpected Arrival. Hordeslayer and Rampart were visibly taken aback. Sir Star Ring frowned. Eyes cold, he looked at the people approaching and growled, "Screw off." His words were like an icy wind, filled with killing intent. That was just how Sir Star Ring acted. Though Xu Qing had killed him, he had been born again and his personality hadn't changed. He was arrogant and ice-cold down to his soul. It didn't matter if he was facing a quasi-immortal just like himself, who had a lot of friends with him, and even a peak quasi-immortal backing him up. He cultivated order, and would rather break than bend. The middle-aged cultivator laughed. "You've got quite a temper." Eyes flashing, he turned to his leader and bowed. The old man frowned, but yet again nodded. The middle-aged cultivator's aura flared. He seemed to be borrowing outside power. He waved his hand, then pushed down, and ripples flowed out over the surface of the Black Sea. Astonishingly, a host of flying black insects emerged. They were extremely vicious and ugly. What was more, they were not corporeal. In the shortest of moments, there were so many of them they were impossible to count. After rising up from the Black Sea, they charged toward Sir Star Ring. Sir Starring's eyes flashed coldly as a host of chains materialized around him. Clanking sounds could be heard as they swirled into a vortex. The might of order could suppress all. The Tao of balance could eradicate anything. Hordeslayer and Rampart cooperated smoothly, as both of them unleashed sword energy that bolstered Sir Starring. In the face of their divine abilities, the black insects began to collapse en masse. Sir Starring's vortex of order chains was whipping up into a tempest. From a distance, it looked as if the black insects would be rooted in one move. However, the collapsing insects didn't completely disappear. Instead, the resulting black ash and dust became a cloud that spread out rapidly. At the same time, the middle-aged cultivator performed an incantation gesture and pointed out. The black cloud swept around him, surrounding him in layer after layer, even covering his face. It was almost like it was molding him a new body. In the blink of an eye, the middle-aged cultivator's face disappeared, to be replaced by a featureless mask. Moments later, the face blurred and a new set of facial features became visible. They were different from before. They were the facial features of Sir Starring. His facial expression, aura, and soul now seemed to be exactly the same as Sir Starring. Next, black smoke converged on either side of his head, where it formed two additional heads. They looked like Hordeslayer and Rampart. The other Ascendi's heart sank. Next, the middle-aged cultivator in his terrifying three-headed giant form looked at Sir Starring and the others and laughed loudly. Then he simply ignored them and walked back to his companions. His companions didn't seem to find this unusual at all, as if it happened all the time. And their leader, without so much as a backward glance, started to walk away. The entire group was clearly going to leave. But then a very strange event unfolded. The departure of the middle-aged cultivator seemed to do something to Sir Starring, Hordeslayer, and Rampart. The three of them started trudging forward as if they had lost control of their own bodies. Hordeslayer and Rampart had completely blank looks on their faces, as if their souls had been extracted. Though Sir Starring continued forward, his eyes shone with an aggressive light, and creaking sounds echoed out with every step he took. The control exerted over him was clearly crumbling. The middle-aged cultivator made an exclamation of surprise. Even the old man looked over his shoulder at Sir Starring. "Impressive," the old man said. "Go get him." 3 members of the squadron walked out and flew toward Sir Starring. Zhou Jingli looked on thoughtfully, all while Sir Vilespirit licked his lips. Yuan Shu frowned. The other Ascendis said nothing, but some seemed to be bristling aggressively. These were cultivators who had risen through slaughter to become Ascendis, so they were a proud lot. Even though they weren't necessarily friends with these people, it didn't sit right with them to see their fellows being treated like this and not interfere. Unfortunately, these acquisitioners were clearly stronger than them, having several quasi-immortals and the old man who was stronger than anyone else. There was a big disparity between the two groups, so though they were agitated, no one dared to step forward. This didn't sit right with Xu Qing either. Those 2 swords belonged to him. As for Sir Starring, after a bit of thought, Xu Qing came to the conclusion that something fishy was going on. If this were happening elsewhere, it might make sense. But this was the reception universe. The new Ascendis were supposed to be getting their permanent assignments. For them to be conscripted by the Department of Acquisitions at this moment seemed to indicate that the so-called reception they were being given was nothing more than a joke. Ads by Pobrev. Something out of the ordinary is going on. Xu Qing's eyes narrowed and he casually stepped forward. As he did, his aura erupted. The cannon of space-time filled heaven and earth, and a bell flew out from his forehead. The bell chimed. The sound echoed out ethereally, filling the hearts and minds of everyone present. All faces reacted with shock. That included all of Xu Qing's fellow Ascendis and the members of the Acquisitioner Squadron. The bell entered their ears like thunder, shaking them inside and out. Their cultivation bases went still, and all of their magical techniques stopped working. Some people even fell out of midair and crashed onto the ground. The 3 cultivators who had been flying toward Sir Starring shivered, and their eyes filled with shock as they realized they couldn't advance any further. The brothers Hordeslayer and Rampart also shivered. But when the bell chimed, they suddenly felt very clear-headed. Sir Star Ring, whose head had already been starting to clear, completely woke up. Killing intent blazed in his eyes. But the person affected the most was the middle-aged cultivator. His 3 heads all exploded, and the fleshly body of Black Ash collapsed. Black smoke poured out in all directions as his true body was revealed. His pupils were constricted as he looked in Xu Qing's direction. He looked very serious, as if he was facing an arch-nemesis. At the same time, he was filled with a sensation of having barely escaped a big catastrophe. And that was because, at some point in the past few moments, an iron skewer had come to appear right in front of him. The skewer was incredibly sharp and emanated a cold aura that clamped down on the middle-aged cultivator's soul. He really had no idea when that skewer had come to be in front of him, but he knew that he had somehow barely avoided having it stabbed into his forehead. In fact, there were 2 fingers holding onto the skewer and preventing it from hurting him. The person holding the iron skewer was his leader, the old man who was indescribably close to the peak of Quasi Immortal. The old man turned and looked at Xu Qing. Xu Qing did nothing to avoid his gaze. Voice cool, he said, "Those are my swords and my people." The old man looked deeply at him for a moment. Then he looked up into the sky, clasped hands, and bowed. "Arch-Immortal, my squadron has already finished the extra mission you assigned us. May we leave?" Astonished, everyone looked up into the sky. Xu Qing did as well. Ripples spread out in the previously calm dome of heaven, as the previously dim sky suddenly started to fill with color. It was a dazzling assortment of colors that gathered together into a patch of absolute brilliance. The outline of a figure appeared, walking through the brilliance. He was an unprepossessing old man. He wore rough hemp garments that made him look like a fisherman, and in one hand he held a roughly carved walking stick. The walking stick was covered with cracks, much like the wrinkles on his face. The moment he appeared, the old man who was nearly at the peak of Quasi Immortal bowed his head. All of the members of his squadron followed his lead. The moment Li Mengtu saw the new arrival, his expression flickered dramatically. His eyes went wide with disbelief, and he exclaimed, "Master." It was hard to tell how sincere he was in his excitement. Xu Qing, meanwhile, was shaken to the core. There was something very familiar about this old man. It was his cannon that Xu Qing had ultimately abandoned. He was Li Mengtu's master, and he was the immortal from the Dao Immortal sect in the Western planetary system. Poison Monarch. Xu Qing's guard immediately went up. He knew full well that Poison Monarch was not a virtuous person. He had provided his cannon, not out of good intentions, but because that cannon contained karma that he could lend out and take back. If Xu Qing had not gained enlightenment of his space-time cannon, then the other cannon would have caused him immeasurable harm. It was a Dao that could be given and taken. That was why he had ultimately chosen to abandon it. Right now, Xu Qing couldn't fathom why this person would appear right here and now. What was more, he didn't just serve as Poison Monarch. He wasn't just a heavenly inspector in the Dao Immortal sect. He also had another post. Looking around at everyone, Poison Monarch spoke in a raspy voice. "I am the director of the Department of Acquisitions." 1207, Covert and Overt. As Poison Monarch spoke, his voice transformed into numerous 5-colored butterflies that appeared in front of Xu Qing and the other ascendees. They were very unique jade slips. As they flapped their wings, they transmitted information directly into the minds of everyone present. The Department of Acquisitions was one of the 324 departments in the Reception universe. The director was tasked with providing special materials for the war. Usually, the department was sent to a specific area with a specific deadline to acquire funds and provisions. They would then be sent back to the Reception universe, where the profits would be transferred to the Department of Transportation, and beyond that, to the front lines. Because of the wartime situation, everything the Department of Acquisitions did was centered around the acquisitions. In terms of what the department sought to acquire, it boiled down to one thing. It was something that all imperial sovereigns and higher desperately needed: ring source. Unfortunately, the The ring source needs of the war effort surpassed those of individual cultivators. As a result, there was no way they could go about acquiring ring source in the way Xu Qing had done in the Ink Sun universe, in other words, by fishing. The focus of the Department of Acquisitions were the non-human universes in the heavens beyond heaven in the fifth star ring. It was extracted from their blood and their life force. That included the various god prisons located in large numbers in the various heavens beyond heaven. Of course, there were different types of prisons. Some were operated on the universe level, some belonged to the heavens beyond heaven. Others were run by clans and were considered private ventures. The gods held in the prisons served as the origin of ring source. As the information poured into Xu Qing's mind, his gaze hardened. Now he understood why the Acquisitioner squadrons had such strong auras of death. Their main job was killing and extracting. What was more, they did things in a very domineering fashion. After getting used to acting in that way, it was only natural that they would be filled with perverse energy. The information also provided a clear explanation of who Poison Monarch really was. Poison Monarch had long since performed amazing services. Though he was indeed in charge of the Dao Immortal sect in the Western planetary system of the Immortal Capital, he was also the director of the Department of Acquisitions. Thanks to the information from the butterflies, everyone now had a much better understanding of the Department of Acquisitions. Up in midair, Poison Monarch looked at the squadron that had clashed with Xu Qing and the Ascendees. The lot of you go turn in your ring source. The old leader of the squadron bowed along with the other cultivators, and then they flew off into the distance. The cultivator who had very nearly been stabbed in the forehead by Xu Qing's iron skewer stopped in the distance and looked back at him. His eyes flickered with both fear and defiance. Xu Qing could sense that and committed the man to memory. After they were gone, Xu Qing and the other Ascendees were left alone on the Black Sea, digesting the information about the Department of Acquisitions. Xu Qing's guard was up, and Li Mengtu was feeling nervous. But no one else had ever dealt with Poison Monarch, so as far as they were concerned, he was just an immortal and their future commanding officer. Regardless of the level of their cultivation base, the Ascendees all bowed respectfully. After all, failing to respect immortals was a grave crime in the fifth star ring. Starting on this very day, started Poison Monarch, but he paused after only 5 words. All of a sudden, great pressure swept over the group. He didn't pay any attention to his own apprentice, Li Mengtu, nor did he seem to care about Xu Qing. He wasn't concerned about things that had happened in the past. His previous actions had been little more than a standard test. But as he looked around, everyone bowed their heads. A moment later, Poison Monarch continued in a raspy voice. This group of Ascendees is all being assigned to posts in the Department of Acquisitions. Since you all have the same assignment, then you might as well be a squadron of your own. As for the captain. Poison Monarch looked at Xu Qing, then Sir Star Ring and Yuan Su, as well as Zhou Jingli. Of those 4, 2 had quasi-immortal cultivation bases, 1 had quasi-immortal battle prowess. And as for Zhou Jingli, when he realized he was being looked at, he stepped back, seemingly terrified and deferential. Sir Star Ring looked surprised. Clearly, he had just come to the realization that everything that had just played out was a test. And more importantly than that, someone had been trying to split them up. But thanks to Xu Qing interfering, that effort had failed. It was easy to imagine that if they had been split up, then they wouldn't have ultimately been put into one squadron. They would have been split up into 2 or more groups. It had never occurred to Sir Star Ring that Xu Qing would help him. After a moment of silence, he said, "I'm not interested in the position of captain." At almost the same time, Yuan Su quietly took a step backward. Her personality had changed. After everything that happened in the Aurora Immortal Palace, she had come to truly revere Xu Qing. One reason was because of his methods. The other, as one of the very last shining stars to leave the Immortal Palace, she knew a lot more than many of them. She also had certain speculations. For instance, she was certain she knew who had taken the identity of young Lord Aurora, and she was fairly certain that the real young Lord Aurora wasn't dead. She was also convinced that the identity she had taken was also still alive. Given all that, she didn't want to be the leader of their squadron. Face completely expressionless, Poison Monarch looked at Xu Qing. Xu Qing. Xu Qing looked up with clasped hands. The more he was convinced Poison Monarch had sinister intentions, the more he knew that he couldn't reveal any weaknesses. That included failing to show respect to immortals. You are assigned to be the leader of this squadron. You will leave immediately for your appointed destination to carry out resource acquisitions. Your deadline is in 5 months. He waved his hand, and a ring of holding flew over and hovered in front of Xu Qing. In there, you'll find your acquisitioner uniforms, identity medallions, and also the information about your mission. And now, all of you can go out and wait outside the reception universe, with the exception of you, Xu Qing. You stay behind. Poison Monarch flicked his sleeve. Heaven and earth trembled, and everything blurred as all the other ascendees, except for Xu Qing, vanished. They had been teleported away by an incredible force. Xu Qing's pupils had constricted slightly, though it wasn't easy to tell. He just stood there, looking as respectful as possible. Poison Monarch hovered in the air. He stood on the sea. The atmosphere became as still as death. Neither of them spoke. A long moment passed, and then Poison Monarch took a step forward, blurring slightly as he appeared in front of Xu Qing. An immortal filled with evil intentions stood right in front of Xu Qing. The pressure he felt was incredible. Especially noteworthy was the fact that Xu Qing could sense that this was no ordinary immortal. Even though he was a lower immortal, it was obvious that he ranked near the very top among that group. Someone like that could obviously kill Xu Qing with a thought. Thankfully, this was the reception universe in the Nine Shores heaven, a heaven beyond heaven in the 5th star ring. As long as Xu Qing had not committed any crime, then he would be safe. That was why he was making sure to maintain a very respectful attitude. You're clearly an extremely vigilant person, Poison Monarch said. You're uneasy, but aren't showing it at all. Xu Qing, though this is my first time meeting you in person, I have to admit that you've surprised me. I'm grateful for your approval, Arch-Immortal, Xu Qing said in a tone that was neither supercilious nor obsequious. Your humble servant is honored to receive such praise. Poison Monarch looked at him deeply, then started walking across the Black Sea. Xu Qing hesitated briefly and then followed. The wind blew, stirring the sea. A short time passed, and then Poison Monarch said, Xu Qing, I previously wanted to take your Dao to break through into the Immortal Lord level. Xu Qing didn't say anything. Many years have passed here in the 5th star ring since Immortal Lord Aurora perished. During that time, not a single new Immortal Lord has risen up. The pace of the war is speeding up. Momentum is increasing. Poison Monarch's voice seemed to drift along like a helpless sigh. The main reason that's happening is that a new God Lord has appeared in the 4th star ring. That God Lord's overall strength has pushed us to a point of life or death in this war between star rings. Do you understand, Xu Qing? It is vital for everyone involved that the 5th star ring get a new Immortal Lord. As for myself, Poison Monarch stopped walking. I am the person in the 5th star ring who is in the best position to break through and become an Immortal Lord among lower immortals. Xu Qing somberly clasped hands and bowed. Your humble servant offers congratulations, Arch-Immortal. I hope that your breakthrough comes soon and that you quickly rise to the glorious position of Immortal Lord. Poison Monarch turned to look at him. Xu Qing's expression was sincere. Eventually, Poison Monarch shook his head and laughed softly again. Although I failed to take your Dao, you're still connected to me by destiny. I kept you behind today because I have an errand for you to handle for me. A few years ago, Immortal Lord Nineshores gave the Department of Acquisitions a mission. We were tasked with finding a mysterious piece of 9-colored ice that was capable of extinguishing the fire of a God Lord. I've been looking this entire time for that 9-colored ice, but have failed to find it. I have never entrusted the task to anyone else. But today, I'm giving you a chance. Are you willing to look for it? Poison Monarch looked over at Xu Qing. He wanted to see if Xu Qing understood the implications of this offer. Xu Qing's eyes glittered, and his impression of Poison Monarch suddenly improved. The meaning in the words was obvious. He was being given a good opportunity. There was a tacit understanding among acquisitioners. As long as they met their acquisition quota, anything left over could be kept for personal use. As long as the acquisitioner didn't get too greedy, they could benefit a lot. What was more, it was a mission from an immortal lord, and not just any immortal lord, but immortal Lord Nineshores himself. Given that, Xu Qing would have major protection in carrying out the assignment. With that protection and his status as an acquisitioner, he could do just about anything he wanted, and most likely make out like a bandit. In just about any circumstance that arose, he could just say that he was looking for that 9-colored ice at the behest of the immortal lord. This also meant he could fast-track his cultivation. At the same time, it was a double-edged sword. After all, there could be some severe downsides. For example, failing. Poison Monarch could punish him at any time for failing to acquire the object in question. If he accepted the mission, he would be under the complete control of Poison Monarch. This entire thing was both a covert conspiracy and an overt conspiracy. If he said he understood, it would be an overt conspiracy. If he said he didn't understand, it would be a covert conspiracy. Chapter 1208, Aurora's Heaven Beyond Heaven. It was a poisoned immortal fruit. Xu Qing looked at Poison Monarch, then bowed deeply at the waist. Your humble servant accepts the mission. He wanted the poisoned fruit. Poison Monarch didn't seem surprised. He thought Xu Qing to be much like himself. If you wanted to get stronger, break through, and reach higher heights, you could definitely ask a tiger for its skin. In this case, Poison Monarch was the tiger. At the same time, Xu Qing was providing a tiger skin to Poison Monarch. After all, the immortal paragon had ordered that no one infect Xu Qing with their karma. That's just going to make things interesting. Poison Monarch flicked his sleeve and started walking away. He blurred, as if he were becoming one with heaven and earth. Ultimately, he vanished, leaving behind a few words echoing about. You're on your own now, Xu Qing. After he was gone, everything went back to normal. Then a golden stream of starlight descended from above, wrapped around Xu Qing, and drew him up into the sky. He rose up into the canopy of heaven and ultimately left the planet that housed the Department of Acquisition's headquarters. He didn't resist. He allowed the starlight to guide him up. As the planet grew smaller and smaller in his view, his thoughts wandered. Although the immortal fruit was poisoned, it was extremely fresh and of good quality. The downsides and upsides were clear to see. Furthermore, Xu Qing wasn't under the illusion that eating the poisoned immortal fruit would mean that the other party's evil intentions would go away completely. Those evil intentions were related to personal progress, so it was almost certain that the two of them would clash again later. Rather than place his hope on the off chance that the other party would simply give up, Xu Qing preferred to take control. Besides, he was well aware that he currently had a severe lack of cultivation resources. With a good excuse to work with, he was definitely going to be able to make some advancement. And thus, rather than worry about when the poison might flare up, he figured it would be better to just eat the fruit and grow stronger as quickly as possible. It was similar to how, back when he had no cultivation base, and was stuck in that city that the broken face had just looked at, he ultimately chose to start practicing cultivation, if for no other reason than to get rid of mutagen more quickly. That same frame of mind applied here. Besides, to a certain degree, Poison Monarch was right. The two of them really were very similar. In any case, it's still possible that I could deal with a poison flare-up if it happens. Xu Qing's eyes narrowed as the planet grew smaller and smaller, all while the reception universe as a whole filled his field of view. Eventually, the entire universe was visible to him, and the starlight took him completely out. When he appeared in the starry sky, he caught sight of Sir Star Ring and everyone else. They were waiting for him. Coming to a stop in front of them, he waved his hand to open the ring of holding. The Acquisitioner identity medallions flew out. They were gray pieces of jade. Everyone took their medallion and sent some divine will inside. Light flared, which then turned into gray 100-pocket robes. Everything around Xu Qing blurred as he also donned a 100-pocket robe. From a distance, the group of 89 cultivators were all dressed alike, causing an indescribable air of prestige to surround them. Looking very serious, Zhou Jingli strode forward and bowed to Xu Qing. "Greetings, Captain." The other ascendees, regardless of what they were thinking inside, also offered formal greetings. That included Yuan Shensu. As for Horde Slayer and Rampart, they were about to join in when they realized Sir Star Ring wasn't moving a muscle. All of a sudden, Horde Slayer and Rampart seemed to stand a bit taller. Xu Qing didn't seem to care either way about any of it, taking out the mission Jade slip. He sent the mission information into the minds of everyone present. Their first mission as Acquisitioners was to take place in the Heliodora universe. They were to go there and search for resources. 1. There was something unique about the Heliodora universe. It was not in the Nine Shores heaven. It was located in another heaven beyond heaven. However, that heaven beyond heaven was not listed alongside the 11 immortal lords. Put most precisely, this heaven beyond heaven belonged to a perished immortal lord. As a result, that heaven was masterless. The name of that heaven beyond heaven had long since been erased. After looking at the mission Jade slip, Xu Qing was instantly shaken inside. He wasn't the only one. Other ascendees, particularly Sir Star Ring and the other shining stars, all had odd looks on their faces. In all of the 5th star ring, there was only one place that matched that description. It was, of course, the Aurora heaven beyond heaven. Prompted by instinct, Li Mengtu and Zhou Jingli looked at Xu Qing. Even Horde Slayer, Rampart, Yuan Shensu, and Sir Star Ring all looked in his direction. After what all of them had experienced in the historical reflection of the Aurora Immortal Palace, they had come to view Xu Qing as young Lord Aurora. The entire event had left a deep impression on them. Xu Qing's eyes narrowed as he checked the details of the mission. It said that to get to the Heliodora universe, they had to take the mission Jade slip to a teleportation facility, where arrangements had been made for them to teleport to their destination. Because that heaven beyond heaven was masterless, it had become a public place. What was more, because of the historical events of the past, the non-humans there had become quite rebellious by nature. After all, there was no heaven for them to be subordinate to. When people from other heavens beyond heaven went inside, they would usually split up based on who backed them. Compared to other heavens beyond heaven, it was a wild and disorderly place, where everything was a complicated Jianghu-like world. It had countless universes within it, all sorts of non-humans, and a mismatch of organizations. There were also a host of god prisons. Because of that, it was considered to rank high among the heavens beyond heaven. Back in the day, Immortal Lord Aurora was considered to have peak battle prowess among the immortal lords. Based on the description in the mission Jade slip, the Heliodora universe was on the edge of the heaven beyond heaven. It was administered by the imperial clan of the Heliodora race, who were known as Heliodorans. It had a total of 31 god prisons in it. Of those 31 prisons, the biggest was A29, and within it were imprisoned, for the most part, altar gods. After everyone had familiarized themselves with the information from the Jade slip, Xu Qing put it away. He swept the gathered crowd with his gaze, and then, without a word, headed to the nearest teleportation facility, just as the mission had directed. Zhou Jingli and Li Mengtu exchanged a glance, and then followed. Everyone else started moving with glittering eyes, and thus, the group became a stream of 89 beams of light that pierced through the starry sky. As they sped by at top speed, the cultivators they passed mostly just frowned and got out of their way. These were obviously notorious Acquisitioners, and they were like tigers or jackals that no one wanted to get close to, let alone provoke. Half a month passed. In the depths of the Nine Shores, Heaven was an ancient planet that had a teleportation facility built into it. As Xu Qing and the others descended, Xu Qing produced the mission Jade slip, and the portal filled with rumbling sounds. A powerful force of teleportation power caused majestic pulses to flow out in all directions. Xu Qing and the others instantly disappeared. It took them 5 days to reach their destination. When they reappeared, they were in an unfamiliar starry sky, and they were standing on an ancient and crumbling platform made of crimson stone. The platform was hot, but was rapidly cooling down. It took a huge amount of resources to use a teleportation portal that teleported you to another heaven beyond heaven. The requirements for a cultivator to use such a portal were high. Someone without a sufficient cultivation base would likely be killed by the process itself. One could not have any mental flaws either, as one could lose one's mind and ultimately die. When the group materialized, a few dozen people coughed up blood and immediately settled down cross-legged to recover. Some seemed dazed, as if they had been shaken down to their souls. Only Xu Qing and Sir Starring appeared to be completely unfazed. Thankfully, these were all ascendees. Based on everything they had experienced to get to this point, they were elite chosen both in terms of cultivation base and mental acuity. Even though some were affected by such a massive teleportation between heavens beyond heaven, they quickly recovered and began to study their surroundings with divine will. There was very little light in the sky. The stars here were dim. The spirit energy was scarce. The place was truly a wilderness. "So, this is the Heliodora universe," Xu Qing murmured as he stood on the stone platform and looked around. Then he glanced at Zhou Jingli. Zhou Jingli understood the meaning of his glance. Stepping forward, he bowed and said, "Young lord, everyone is aware of the mission and the parameters. I suggest we split up. Regardless of how we fare, we'll pool our resources when we meet back up. If anyone runs into a situation too difficult to handle, they can use up some of their ring source to call for help from nearby. If even that fails to resolve any sticky situation, then the young master can intervene. Of course, the premise is that the ring source at hand is worth it. What do you say, sir?" Zhou Jingli looked at Xu Qing. Xu Qing nodded. He wasn't inclined to waste time and energy making complicated arrangements. Besides, he knew that everyone was after ring source, so there was no way he could completely avoid people taking some for their own. It made more sense to give people some leniency in that regard. "I'll handle prison A29. The rest of you can decide amongst yourselves where you want to go other than that." With that, Xu Qing blurred off into the distance. After he was gone, everyone exchanged glances. There was some brief communication, and then some people went off on their own, while others stuck together in groups of between 3 to 5. And thus, they were like a cloud of locusts that dispersed in different directions. In the depths of the Heliodora universe was a galaxy in which floated an amazing imperial palace. There was currently a lot of singing and dancing going on in the palace. Seated on the imperial throne was a red-skinned giant with 2 faces, resting his head on one hand. All of a sudden, a jade slip flew into the palace and stopped in front of the giant. There, it popped, producing the projected image of a figure who immediately prostrated to the 2-faced giant. "Your Majesty, an acquisition squadron from the Nine Shores, heaven beyond heaven, just entered our Heliodora universe." The 2-faced giant didn't look at the newly arrived messenger. He just kept watching the singing and dancing. "You know the drill. Make sure they find some ring source. If these jackals know what's good for them, they'll take some scraps and then leave. But if they don't know what's good for them, then we'll make sure they understand who's really in charge of the Heliodora universe." 1. What I'm rendering as Heliodora is a reference to an ancient Chinese theory about the nature of the universe. There were 2 common theories, which are generally rendered as heliocentric theory and geocentric theory. In this case, helio refers to the sun and geo to the earth. I think you can get the meaning just on that, but to be absolutely clear, they were conflicting theories about whether the center of the universe was the sun or the earth. A third theory eventually came around that was a mixture of the 2. I'm using Heliodora because it mixes 2 words related to sun and earth. It also works in other contexts, as you will see. Chapter 1209, God Fodder. Xu Qing was like a shooting star zipping through the starry sky, leaving behind a wake of distortions. The ripples of his passage were a result of his cultivation base, as well as the might of his immortal embryo. In some respects, it was similar to the gods. It was just what happened when cultivation reached a certain level. Just as there were many ways for the weak to be vulnerable, the strength of the powerful was often a convergence. Xu Qing had his destination locked in, but wasn't going all out in terms of speed. He was taking time to study his immortal embryo, but at the same time, he was paying attention to the universe around him, this new heaven beyond heaven. The events at the fallen immortal moors were only a reflection of history. And yet, the effects of Hordeslayer and Rampart acknowledging me as owner spread into the real world. Li Mengtu's poison cannon also gained something of an origin. And in the Incland, Starfear summoned a manifestation of the 100 Flowers Palace. It all goes to show that, though the events and the reflection of history didn't change anything in the real world, they did have some effect. What's more, I was given command over the Aurora Immortal Palace there. The Immortal Palace is the most integral aspect of a heaven beyond heaven, the most paramount location. That's why the Aurora Immortal Palace only appears when there's a spirit tide. The real Immortal Palace is most likely in this very heaven beyond heaven, if I call on my command of the Immortal Palace in this heaven beyond heaven. Xu Qing's eyes glittered, and his heart raced with curiosity. As he proceeded along, he sent out his divine will to try to find the Immortal Palace. It didn't work. Perhaps it was because too much time had passed, or perhaps it was because the Immortal Palace had sunk into ruin. Eventually, he sighed and abandoned such attempts. His destination was prison A29. It was the biggest god prison in the Heliodora universe, and it was also where the largest portion of ring source came from. As the captain of an Acquisitioner squad, it was only natural that he was able to take the biggest slice of cake. He wasn't concerned with whatever danger his so-called subordinates got into, nor was he concerned with where they got ring source in the Heliodora universe. Whether it was from god prisons or non-humans, it didn't matter to him. If they ran into obstacles trying to collect ring source, or got into conflicts with non-humans, others would step in, if for no other reason than to get more ring source for their own collections. Unless things really got out of hand, Xu Qing didn't have any intention of interfering with anyone. He was completely and utterly focused on one thing. I need to collect ring source and upgrade my immortal embryo. Eyes sparkling and heart full of determination, he accelerated. He even took advantage of some teleportation portals he encountered. In that manner, he spent about 10 days going halfway across the Heliodora universe. That was when he reached his destination. Picturesque places around the world, tips for visiting open. It was a red starry sky. The red color didn't come from starlight. Rather, it came from a shockingly enormous red kelp plant. It had 19 leaves, each of which was so long that it could wrap around a planet. The 19 leaves all met at the base, which was where a network of fine roots grew downward. The roots surrounded and were embedded into a huge sun, from which they constantly extracted nutrients. Xu Qing looked at the kelp plant, his eyes shining. A plant growing in the starry sky. I wonder if my god vine could eventually grow into something like this. Xu Qing cast his senses into the Sage Heaven Pagoda and the god vine that was part of it. The god vine was asleep, but based on its aura, it seemed like it would be able to wake up fairly soon. Xu Qing looked back at the kelp plant. As he looked at it more closely, he realized that upon the 19 leaves were spots of various sizes. Each spot is a minor world. They're all prison blocks, and the biggest prison block of all is in that sun. As Xu Qing studied the kelp, it flickered with red light, and then a terrifying stream of divine will spread out from it. It locked onto Xu Qing, and it was so terrifying that it felt like he was dealing with an immortal. Xu Qing's eyes hardened. He could tell that this red kelp was not the prison. It was responsible for keeping the prison in check. He took out his Acquisitioner medallion, as well as his mission jade slip. I'm here on a mission from the Nine Shores Heaven to collect ring source. The divine will from the red kelp swept around Xu Qing and examined the medallion and jade slip. A moment later, it seemed to make a decision. The divine will retracted slowly, and one of the leaves slowly drifted up to Xu Qing. He looked at the leaf, and then looked at the sun surrounded by the kelp plant's roots. After considering the situation momentarily, he stepped onto the leaf and raced toward one of the spots on it. The spot grew larger and larger from his perspective, until it was a world. He pierced through the barriers of the world, and then rumbling sounds echoed out. He landed on black soil. Everything was rotten and full of death as far as the eye could see. There was no wind, no spirit, no mutagen. Everything was barren and deathly. He studied his surroundings, looked down at the ground, and then, without an expression on his face, stomped his foot down. "Wake up," he said coolly. Rumbling sounds echoed out as a wind picked up, spirit filled the world, and mutagen turned into a tempest. It kicked up black soil in all directions, causing it to fill the sky and obscuring Xu Qing himself. If you could stand at a very high vantage point and look down at that exact moment, you would clearly see that there was a huge line on the surface of the ground. And that line was currently rising up, lifting the soil like a wave in the sea. And then the line parted, revealing an enormous, bloodshot eye. Its eye had opened. 8H36 Min, how do you understand your dog? Answers to your questions, more 20,968,389. The black ground had merely been covering that eye, and once Xu Qing had stepped down, the eye had no choice but to open. As the tempest raged around Xu Qing, he stood unmoving, right on top of the pupil of the eye. It looked at Xu Qing coldly, without happiness or anger. Inferior species, slave. Xu Qing's facial expression remained the same as usual. This was the eye of a flawless god. "You're flawless, relatively speaking," Xu Qing said calmly to the eye of the god beneath his feet. Long ago, Xu Qing had encountered similar eyes back in the revered ancient mainland. 1. Every eye he had seen had caused him to tremble as mutagen assailed him. In some cases, the gaze of such eyes made it feel like his flesh and blood were independent entities that wanted to separate from him. That was the result of the vast disparity in the levels of life force involved. But right now, his gaze was calm and unruffled. In fact, the eye of the god seemed to be contorting and becoming increasingly bloodshot. This god was not like it had been in the past, and even where it was at its peak, it would still react similarly to Xu Qing. Xu Qing lifted his hand to reveal his acquisitioner's medallion. The medallion served to confirm his status and the rights that came with it. It also had the unique function of being able to extract ring source. He held out the medallion and pushed it down in front of him. The god's eye contorted with greater intensity, and a sound like a howl rose up. Golden ring source began to seep out of the eye. Every strand that was extracted caused immeasurable pain to the god's eye. Eventually, after 49 strands had been extracted, the god's eye became as gray as ash. That was the limit. The eye twitched as it began to close, to return to a state of slumber. Xu Qing frowned. That's not very much. The ring source he had collected was hardly larger than the fist of an infant. It wasn't nearly as pure as the ring source he had collected from the inclanned. Naturally speaking, he would need far more than this to be able to make use of it. With that thought in mind, his eyes flashed coldly. Then, instead of putting away his identity medallion, he pushed it down toward the closing eye of the god. It hit the eye just as the eyelids were about to meet. The eye snapped open, and this time it emanated a different type of fluctuation. It was the terror that intelligent beings experienced in the face of death. The terror didn't last for long. Xu Qing held nothing back to extract many more golden threads from the eye. This wasn't just ring source. This was pure life force. A cry of anguish echoed out for a time before vanishing. And then the eye of the god collapsed into ash, having been completely destroyed. Its death caused even more ring source to appear. Because of all the ring source, Xu Qing could sense the mark of Starfire on his arm trembling. Xu Qing took a strand of ring source and put it above the mark. "Want it?" he asked. Starfire ceased trembling, and then a gravitational force sprang out of the mark. The ring source was sucked in, and then Xu Qing heard a silken voice speaking in his mind. "Thank you, young lord. You're truly amazing." Face expressionless, Xu Qing hovered in place and began to absorb the ring source. As the ring source entered him, his immortal embryo glittered and its aura improved. Eventually, Xu Qing's eyes shone and he licked his lips. "Not enough by far. I need much, much more." Xu Qing burst into motion, as he went to another minor world. In that manner, time passed. Xu Qing went to one minor world after another on the leaf. In every one, a god died to provide ring source, and thus his immortal embryo began to shine more and more brightly. As far as Xu Qing was concerned, there was no advantage in leaving the gods alive. The mission Jade Slip had not left any instructions to do so. He collected every scrap that was available, keeping some aside for the mission and taking the rest for himself. Meanwhile, the other ascendees were in other locations doing their best to collect ring source in whatever ways they could. Some they kept for the mission, but the rest they used for their personal cultivation. Looking at them from a different perspective, they really did seem like jackals. Some of the eyes Xu Qing encountered were in chapters 49, 369, 524.2, and 838. I believe there were others. These were just the first 3 I was able to easily find. Chapter 1210, Accepting Bribes. When perspectives differed, so did attitudes and actions. It wasn't a simple matter of good or evil. After all, good versus evil often played out even among members of the same species. There was little need to mention hatred, fury, or ambivalence toward non-humans. After all, their ancestors were gods. If the immortal revolution hadn't occurred in the 5th star ring, then they would be the ruling class. Humans would be slaves that they could take advantage of at will. But the gods had been either slaughtered or rounded up and imprisoned. So the non-humans were like fish on the chopping block. In some ways, it was like reincarnation. It wasn't possible to say who was wrong or right. It was only possible to say that regardless of which species was in question, and regardless of whether it was immortals or gods, perspective determined everything. The weak were doomed to be devoured by the strong. Those who fell behind would lose the right to continue onward. Cultivators did not live the way the gods had lived in the past, but that was a fundamental magical law of the higher star rings, or perhaps of all living beings in general. Victims wouldn't always be victims, and the victimizers wouldn't always be victimizers. In the end, everything was cyclical. It was a truth Xu Qing had come to understand back in the revered ancient mainland. After everything he had experienced in the 5th star ring, he understood more than ever how to deal with the gods here. It was all according to the laws that bound everything. It was just like the discarnate wills of obsession in the heroic immortal tombs. That was how the 5th star ring treated the gods, as well as the non-humans. In the end, it was the same with Xu Qing. And yet, based on his judgment, among all of those apathetic gods, there were some that were more human than most humans. Unfortunately, these imprisoned gods were not among them. Xu Qing wasn't some sort of loving philanthropist who would take time getting to know each and every god before deciding what to do with them. He had no qualms about draining the pond to get at the fish, and thus, it didn't take long for him to reach the last minor world on the leaf. The environment consisted of a viscous black sea. The sea was calm, but did not seem auspicious and peaceful. The water stank, and powerful mutagen roiled in all directions. A head was buried in the seafloor. It looked like the head of a bird, covered with tentacles that constantly excreted a viscous fluid. Over time, that fluid had turned into a black sea. When Xu Qing arrived, the mutagen kicked up into a frenzy. Huge waves rolled across the surface of the sea, and the head below looked up, eyes opening. Golden light shone up through the sea as the head looked up. A strange sound that could shake the mind and heart filled Xu Qing's ears. It became a host of thoughts that weren't his own, growing in his head. As the intangible thoughts formed and took shape, they became strands of excreted black fluid that wrapped around his head. The mutagen became a tempest that raged toward Xu Qing. The waves grew larger, and the entire world began to spin. The sea became the sky. The sky became the earth below. And then the Black Sea began to pour down like rain. And thanks to the power of the inversion, the head broke free. The world blurred as rumbling sounds filled heaven and earth. A few breaths of time passed, whereupon a dense immortal energy erupted from the chaotic blur. Mountain toppling, sea-draining force spread out, crushing everything and driving everything away. Everything then became clear and bright. The mutagen began to dissolve within the immortal energy. The viscous sea vaporized. Xu Qing became clear. He reached out with his right hand and grabbed a head that was vastly larger than his own body. His 5 fingers stabbed into the flesh of the head. Though there was a huge disparity in size, there was only one source of terror, and it was the head. It was trembling. Golden strands of ring source were extracted and poured into the medallion in Xu Qing's hand. Eventually, an anguished howl echoed out. The god's head trembled, turned gray, and collapsed into dust. Xu Qing hovered alone in midair, his gaze sharp as he looked around. The marks sealing this place are on the verge of fading away. That's why the god was able to take the initiative. But the sealing mark wasn't touched by the god. It seems to have been affected by something else. Something was helping it break down the seal. It was giving it a chance to break free of the prison. Was it non-humans? Or was it the jail itself accepting bribes? Xu Qing had been a jailer in the past, so he knew full well how jailers could shamelessly seek personal gain. He pondered that for a time, his eyes narrowing. Then he flew out of the minor world and appeared out in the starry sky. He looked at the red kelp plant. He closely examined the other leaves. The kelp plant swayed. Finally, Xu Qing said, "The gods in the other leaves are almost all dead. You ate them, didn't you?" The swaying kelp leaves suddenly began drifting rapidly toward Xu Qing. Xu Qing didn't move a muscle. "The leaf you offered to me was prepared in advance for collection purposes, so that no one would realize you had been accepting bribes. Am I right?" A terrifying will built up, aggressive and full of astonishing pressure. Cracking sounds echoed out in the surrounding starry sky, all while gruish symbols floated up, locking the place down. Eyes narrowing, Xu Qing continued, "I have a good relationship with young Lord Aurora. Check my aura. You'll find I have command over the Aurora Immortal Palace. Immortal Lord Nineshores cares a lot about me. Surely you can sense the aura on this object." Xu Qing took out the wooden slip that was the authentication token for the God Blood River ferry boat. "I'm also the first place ascendee. If I perish here, you'll never get away with it." The kelp plant hesitated, and the terrifying will reached out to the wooden slip. The terrifying will trembled. The stream of will left the slip and surrounded Xu Qing. It checked him more thoroughly. Xu Qing's facial expression remained the same as usual. After the mirrored history of the Aurora Immortal Palace concluded, everyone else experienced lingering effects in the real world, and there was no reason to assume he wouldn't. Though he had not been able to sense the Aurora Immortal Palace in this heaven beyond heaven, he got the feeling it was because the Immortal Palace was in concealment. He might not be able to sense it, but that didn't mean that this kelp plant, which was native to this heaven beyond heaven, couldn't sense it. In other words, he was trying to use a roundabout method to confirm his own identity. It wouldn't matter if he failed, as his biggest protection was Immortal Lord Nineshores, as well as the fact that he was the first place ascendee. And thus, he submitted to the inspection. Moments later, he could sense great fluctuations in the will of the kelp. In fact, the actual plant itself was visibly shaking. Xu Qing's eyes gleamed. He had guessed correctly. The kelp trembled, and its aura became chaotic, as if it had come to a decision. Thanks to the deep inspection the kelp had just carried out, it realized that, hidden within this human, was the ability to command the Aurora Immortal Palace. There was obviously some major karma at play. The command wielded by this human scared it. And the reason was that it was subservient to the Aurora Immortal Palace. Although the Aurora Heaven Beyond Heaven had no master now, the kelp's status was the same as ever, and its actions really did constitute a crime. It was faced with a difficult choice. However, that was when Xu Qing spoke again. "You've been keeping an eye on this god prison for countless years. Nobody will fault you for having an occasional snack when you get hungry." The kelp froze. "And considering the food is almost gone, the fact that you left a whole leaf is really an expression of loyalty." The will of the kelp surged. "After all, I came late. That's not really your fault." The leaves on the kelp plant swayed back and forth, and the pressure reduced significantly. As far as it could tell, this human wasn't joking around. He was being completely serious. Therefore, let's just forget about the past. And now I want to ask you a question. Do you want to eat that? Xu Qing pointed at the sun wrapped up in the roots. The kelp leaves all twitched, and then divine will echoed around Xu Qing, like a deep voice. Yes. Xu Qing nodded. Let me in, protect me, and I'll see how we can split whatever's inside. The kelp hesitated and checked Xu Qing's aura again. Then the roots shifted aside to reveal a path. Before it was completely open, the kelp suddenly sent out its divine will to scan the area. It had sensed something. There's no need to be nervous, Xu Qing said calmly. It's a friend of mine, let him in. The kelp seemed to consider his words, then created an opening in the ceiling barrier. Zhou Jingli shot inside. He quickly looked around. Then, acting as if nothing unusual had just happened, bowed to Xu Qing. What is it? Xu Qing asked. Young lord, Zhou Jingli said respectfully. Some of the others have had no trouble collecting ring source. Others ran into trouble, but everything has been easy to resolve. Unfortunately, something unusual happened with the Helioteran Imperial clan. That's why your humble servant has come. Young lord, can you use your status here in the Aurora Heaven Beyond Heaven to crush those fools who think this place really has no one in charge? Of course, if you're not inclined to help, your humble servant can always go ask Sir Star Ring to handle the situation. Xu Qing looked at him. There was no doubt that Zhou Jingli was very intelligent. If it weren't for the fact that Xu Qing knew he could turn into an adversary at any time, he would probably be very pleased with how he acted. Have Sir Star Ring deal with it, Xu Qing said. Yes, sir, young Lord Aurora. Zhou Jingli backed up and then hurried away. When he was gone, the kelp resealed the area. Xu Qing turned back to the roots. All right, open it up, I'm hungry, and I bet you're hungry too. Without any hesitation, the kelp continued to open the path into the depths of the sun. Eyes glittering, Xu Qing stepped onto the path, chapter 1211, The Way of the Ox. Heat waves buffeted Xu Qing's face. Burning fire was all that could be seen in all directions. Heaven and earth was bright red and dazzling. Everything was made of fire, with the occasional burst of liquid fire here and there. The liquid fire would fly into the air and then explode, leaving behind streams of mysterious magical symbols. From a distance, it looked like an eternal rain of magical symbols. When the symbols landed, they became crimson kelp plants that tried to grow, but unfortunately, couldn't survive in the heat. They would eventually crumble into ashes that then became part of the liquid fire. There were only a very small amount that, by random circumstances, would manage to take root and grow. It was a difficult process, and even while growing, they would occasionally burst into flames. Xu Qing only spotted a few here and there that managed to survive long-term. Most were severely withered and looked like they might be incinerated at any moment. This is only one small area of this sun, but even if you estimate mathematically, you can conclude that not much kelp can survive here. As he acclimated to the heat, he looked off into the distance and said, "Where are the gods locked up?" He was asking the huge kelp plant that existed outside. A moment later, a vague response came from the will of the kelp. In the middle, immortal oath, so I can't go in very deep. The kelp here, my will can help. The voice of the will came and went. It was clear that even the mighty kelp plant was afraid of this sun. Perhaps it was because of the immortal oath, or maybe it was something else. Checks and balances of some sort, or is it more targeted? Thinking back to what he had experienced here so far, Xu Qing decided the first possibility wasn't likely. So he would need to be more careful in case it was the second possibility. With that, he started moving. He wanted to get a more complete picture of this sun, as well as whatever god was sealed in the middle of it. Only then would he start thinking about taking the ring source. In that manner, time passed. A few days later, Xu Qing slowed down. Thanks to his cultivation base, he was quickly acclimating to the place. But even still, he needed to stop every so often and use surrounding bits of kelp to help the process. Only then would he continue. After traveling for about half a month, he reached his limit and had to stop in front of a piece of growing kelp. He hadn't actually entered the central region, but his divine will could detect exactly where that spot was. When he sent his senses forward to that spot, his eyes hardened. By means of his senses, he could see an astonishing sword there. It was stabbed right into the sun. The part sticking out into the open was a hilt like a huge mountain peak. It seemed likely that, on the opposite side of the sun, there was a sword tip piercing out in astonishing fashion. The moment Xu Qing's senses reached the sword, he came to a sudden realization. There is no god imprisoned in this sun. Rather, it is the sun. This sun is a god. It's the type of god equivalent to a lower immortal. It's a true god. Xu Qing's pupils constricted as he looked down at the ground and the withered kelp in the area. He felt shaken. That sword is what's keeping the true god here. It's sealing the god's body. It's stabbed right through the god, leaving the god in a state of neither life nor death. Apparently, it can't rely on its true name to return. To other gods, the kelp leaves suffice to serve as a prison. But to true gods, the kelp is the jailer. The kelp wants to use the true god for its own cultivation, even more than I do. That's why it's continuously dropping seeds here in the hope of establishing a firm connection. It's all in the hopes of absorbing the god. All of the scattered kelp plants here are being used to try to absorb the true god's ring source. Unfortunately, because of the environment and personhood here, there's simply not enough of the kelp to absorb any significant amount of ring source. After a moment of thought, Xu Qing lifted his right hand to reveal the Acquisitioner's medallion designed to absorb ring source. He pushed it down toward the ground. He unleashed all of his cultivation base. This was different from when he had absorbed the other gods. This time, his actions didn't cause the ground to tremble. The sun didn't even seem to react at all. Several strands of golden ring source quietly rose up. However, there weren't many of them. It was as if there was some profound force blocking ring source. Though the extraction effort wasn't a complete failure, it wasn't very successful either. Shortly after, Xu Qing stopped and looked up. Focusing his senses on the sword hilt, his eyes began to shine. "The surface beneath my feet is like a shell," he said out loud. "That means collecting ring source here is going to be very difficult. The best place is going to be where the sword is stabbed inside. That's essentially an injury to the god." His eyes narrowed. "If I really want to eat my fill here, that's where I need to go all out. In that case, it's time to tap into everything you've prepared. Don't hold anything back, and I won't either. Maybe we'll get an opportunity to really stuff ourselves. The alternative is that we make do with the little bit I got just now." Xu Qing stopped speaking and waited. Shortly after, a withered kelp plant in front of him suddenly swayed, almost decisively. And then it reverted from its withered state into being bright red. It wasn't the only one. All of the other living kelp on the sun transformed from being withered into a state of vibrant red. It looked almost like a host of red paramita lilies swaying in all directions, and they were moving toward Xu Qing. Along the way, many of the kelp plants collapsed into dust, but as a group, they continued onward. In short order, Xu Qing was surrounded by a host of undulating kelp. He didn't avoid the plants. They gathered around him in layer after layer over the course of a few dozen breaths of time. Soon, Xu Qing looked very different. He was now a figure in a crimson suit of plant armor, several hundred meters tall. He was like a giant. Majestic life force pulsed from the kelp, filling Xu Qing and giving him astonishing levels of protection. This kelp had been building up on the sun for countless years, and each little bit of force it provided was now being pooled together into an astonishing reserve power. Xu Qing's eyes glittered brightly. He could sense that the kelp was really going for broke. Without any hesitation, he unleashed 5 extremes, using the mutual restraining factors of the 5 elements to create a peak level of resistance. Then he used his space-time cannon to summon overlapping universes. In that manner, he dispelled the pressure weighing down on the path in front of him. Next, his immortal embryo glittered, making him like a person surrounded by flowing lightning. He shot forward. He headed directly toward the huge sword he had just sensed. As he neared, the pressure grew more intense and the fire more terrifying. Xu Qing's external kelp armor was sizzling and crumbling into ashes. He was fully aware that, acting on his own, he would never make it this far. And the moment the kelp armor completely went away, he would be incinerated. After all, this was a true god. But none of that could reduce Xu Qing's resolve. He accelerated. His eyes flashed with a crazy look. If Erniu were here to see, he would let loose exclamations of admiration and would confirm that little Ah Qing had truly mastered the way of the ox. 1. In that manner, time passed. As Xu Qing hurtled onward with that crazy look in his eyes, and as the kelp armor bolstered him, he crossed a vast distance toward the central part of the sun. Soon he spotted the actual sword off in the distance. The sight of it caused him to breathe heavily, and he trembled from head to toe. His soul and fleshly body were very close to catching ablaze, but the fire couldn't do anything to the crazy look in his eyes. If anything, it grew more intense the moment he spotted the huge sword. Acting on instinct, Xu Qing bit his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood. He was using something akin to a blood escape art to get a burst of speed. About 70% of the kelp armor was gone, and the heat was incredibly intense. But he reached the sword. Now he could see the area clearly. There was a massive ravine in the spot where the sword was stabbed into the surface. There was flesh trying to close up the wound and push the sword out, but the sword was incredibly tough and couldn't be moved. As a result, there was no way that the wound could close up. It was something of a deadlock. The moment Xu Qing arrived, he felt a sensation of impending death. He knew that the kelp wasn't going to last much longer, and that he had no way to stand up to the heat. But he also sensed an incredible reserve of ring source within the wound. Given what Xu Qing had seen, this ring source was unprecedented. The only thing that could come close to comparing was the depths of the incland, which he couldn't enter. This destined opportunity, this good fortune. As the craziness in Xu Qing built, he sent an internal message with divine will. "Cover me, Starfear." The mark on his arm immediately unleashed pure coldness. She was unleashing her god power to bolster Xu Qing. Not only was it buying time, it was also there to protect against any sudden malicious act by the kelp. And thus, Xu Qing dropped into a cross-legged position, pulled out the Acquisitioner's medallion, and pushed it down. Instantly, rumbling sounds echoed out as golden strands emerged from the sword wound. It looked like a geyser. Starfire was shaken to the core. The kelp plant was filled with excitement. Xu Qing was going crazy. 1. I'm sure I don't need to remind you that the Niu in Erniu's name means cow-ox. Chapter 12:12, Snatching Food from the Tiger's Mouth. The amount of ring source was flabbergasting. After all, this was a true god. In the higher star rings, true gods were like darling children and were doted on by all of the natural and magical laws. That was one of the main reasons there was a big difference in the undying nature of true gods versus lower immortals. As long as the true name of a true god still existed, as long as it was remembered, then the true god was not truly dead. It was part of the immutable substructure of higher star rings. Not even the immortal paragon could change that. Maybe he could crush countless true gods, but he could not prevent them from returning. That was just the higher nature of true gods. When it came to Preheaven entities, immortals could not equal gods. What was more, there was only one immortal paragon. But after the level of God paragon was the legendary living god level. And in the system of the cultivators, immortal paragon was the end. There was no path after immortal paragon, or if there was, no one had found it. And thus, in order to truly destroy a true god down to its substructure, the immortal paragon needed to find that path and start walking it, to eventually reach that legendary immortal level that was equivalent to living God. That innate higher ability of true gods was one of the reasons why the fifth star ring suppressed and imprisoned them in a special way. Those true gods existed between life and death. Such gods had lost freedom, but were not dead, and thus there was no need to contemplate the god's resurrection. That was really the only way to reduce the total number of true gods in a star ring. Right now, 3 low-level entities had appeared in front of this true god, entities that, when it was in its prime, could have crushed them like gnats. And now they were crazily absorbing its ring source. Starfire inhaled deeply. This entire situation was just too stimulating to her. Up to this point in her life, she had never even encountered a true god. In her god soul was the legacy of a god, and thus, she inherently felt great reverence and longing toward true gods. It led her to instinctively bow her head. Normally speaking, she wouldn't dare to think of stealing from a true god. In fact, back when Xu Qing and Ernyu had stolen the flesh and blood of the broken face, Sunfire, Moonfire, and Starfire had looked on in astonishment, but hadn't dared to sow karma by joining in. Starfire still felt the same. The main difference was that this true god was imprisoned, so if karma was sown, it wouldn't be too problematic. Another difference was that Starfire was no longer just a flawless god in the godfare level like before. She was now an altar god. All she had to do was break through to one additional level, and she would also be a true god. Another reason in her decision was that Xu Qing was going crazy absorbing the ring source. Someone was setting an example, and thus, Starfire just gritted her teeth and ignored the reverence she felt toward true gods thanks to the legacy of a god within. A crazy look appeared in her eyes. Dense ring source swept into Starfire, filling her god body, nourishing her god soul, completing her godly authority, and elevating her personhood. As a result, her godly authority was advancing toward godhood. It felt wonderful to get stronger and stronger. Her life force was leaping, and as a result, she couldn't help but moan in delight. It was a deeply moving sight. Unfortunately, neither Xu Qing nor the kelp were even slightly moved. The kelp was excited for itself. It was a special life form. Technically speaking, it was non-human, but it was also the only example of its species in the entire fifth star ring. For all intents and purposes, it was the species. It did not need to practice cultivation to exist. From the moment it had been born, it simply absorbed the ring source available in the starry sky to grow. In fact, not even it knew how mature it was in terms of growth. It just knew that it needed ring source. A lot of ring source. Unfortunately, even after all of the years standing guard over the prison, it had not come close to reaching maturity. As far as it was concerned, maturity was being similar to a lower immortal or a true god. It had worked hard until now, and only now did it finally see hope. Thus, it devoured the ring source with abandon. Even more than those two, Xu Qing was putting everything on the line. He knew that time was limited. Even though the three of them were working together, they wouldn't be able to stay in this spot for long. He needed to take advantage of every moment to absorb as much ring source as possible. Therefore, he unleashed his spacetime. Overlapping universes and different versions of himself from other spacetimes appeared, and acting as one, they absorbed the ring source. By using this spacetime as the nexus and drawing out other spacetimes along with other spacetime versions of himself, Xu Qing was able to absorb the ring source at an astonishing rate. And thus, ring source poured out of the wound in the sun, with about 70% of it going toward Xu Qing. He didn't hesitate to devour it. Though he couldn't digest much in a short time, he was well prepared. Being unable to absorb all of it on his own, he sent the rest to the other spacetime versions of himself. Working together, they absorbed ring source nonstop. The nourishment brought to Xu Qing's immortal embryo by the ring source was unprecedented. His head filled with rumbling sounds, his soul rose to a higher level, his fleshly body improved, and his immortal embryo advanced. His immortal embryo had already entered the undying level, but now it was going past that. In the blink of an eye, it became more solid, and as the ring source filled it, it glittered with dazzling light. Light swirled as an undying will grew stronger and stronger in his immortal embryo. He almost instantly achieved major success. He trembled from head to toe, and his eyes shone brightly. He knew full well that after the undying level of the immortal embryo, he needed to fuse the illusory reality with the undying, and to do that would require a huge boost of ring source. By combining those elements, he would be able to complete his immortal embryo. And that would mean that his cultivation base had broken out of Imperial Sovereign and into quasi-immortal. the destined opportunity and good fortune at hand caused Xu Qing to go even more crazy. When Xu Qing achieved major success with his immortal embryo, his space-time cannon became full, and he gained even more control over space-time parallelism. In the blink of an eye, he acquired 100 worlds, 100 worlds, 100 versions of himself, and thus he was able to devour even more ring source. It was like a snowball effect. Starfire and the kelp went even more mad, and went all out trying to snatch as much ring source as they could. And thus, as the three of them worked as hard as they could, the first wave of ring source began to weaken. Seeing that, Xu Qing's eyes glittered, and he struggled to push the Acquisitioner's medallion down a bit deeper. More ring source gushed forth as a result. Starfire and the kelp excitedly cried out and prepared to devour it. But even as the second wave of ring source issued forth, the enormous sword began to glitter with silver light. The blinding light created a halo around the sword, almost like a sealing mark, and it began to settle over the wound, as if to cover it. As the wound was covered over, the flow of ring source stopped. Intense rumbling echoed out, because the ring source was unable to emerge. And then, a deep, angry sound pulsed out of the silver light with mountain-toppling, sea-draining force. Who has the outrageous gall to steal the god fodder of an immortal like me? A burst of killing intent swept out in all directions. Xu Qing's gaze hardened. As he watched, the silver light became a sealing mark. The sword and the sealing mark did not have the same origin, as if the latter were a post-heaven construction. However, now wasn't the time to sit around contemplating the matter. As the killing intent flared, he backed up, all while sending space-time cannon ahead of himself and using the cannon of parallelism to defend himself. Starfire once again became a mark on his arm, where she went all out to bolster Xu Qing. Xu Qing sped backward, just beyond the reach of the killing intent. Even being just on the edge of the reach of the killing intent, it still managed to destroy many of his space-time bodies. His true body coughed up mouthful after mouthful of blood. That said, he didn't waste the blood. He used it to unleash various blood escape arts. Rumbling booms echoed out one after another as he teleported backward to safety. Gasping for breath, he continued to flee. Eventually, he reached the exit point where he dashed outside. Once he was hovering out in the starry sky, he managed to relax a bit. After checking himself, he scanned the ring source he had stored in his parallel spacetimes. Once I digest all of that, I should be able to reach complete success with my immortal embryo and become a quasi-immortal. However, it's going to be close. I'd rather have a bit more, just to be safe. And then my battle prowess would soar when I reached quasi-immortal. Licking his lips, he looked deeply at the sun. The killing intent from just now was not something that a quasi-immortal would possess. That was a lower immortal. This place was set up by a lower immortal as a place to gather ring source. It's all being confined here. When I came along to snatch a bit of it for myself, it unleashed that sealing power. As Xu Qing pondered the situation, he turned, looking away from the sun and at the huge kelp plant. After what it had absorbed just now, it had acquired an additional leaf. Though it was only a tiny bud at the moment, its aura was strong. "You knew all along, didn't you?" Xu Qing suddenly said. The kelp was silent for a moment. Then it projected a message via divine will. "He is the last warden in this universe of the Aurora Heaven beyond heaven. Years ago, he was a quasi-immortal, but eventually he became a lower immortal. He moved up in the world thanks to that, but in the process, some problems cropped up. And as a result, he hasn't been able to leave his secluded meditation facilities." The kelp had answered honestly. Apparently, now that it got a good serving of ring source, it didn't feel the need to keep anything hidden. Xu Qing thought about it for a moment. When immortal Lord Aurora perished, the Aurora Immortal Palace lost its glory. All of the high-level officials there experienced tribulation, although it was limited to the immortals. People who didn't qualify to attend the wedding and witness the succession, of which there were many, continued to live life as normal. Without dealing with that ceiling, it will be impossible to continue absorbing ring source. Unfortunately, I can't quite resign myself to giving up now. His eyes glittered with cold light. Maybe he was dealing with an immortal, but the 5th star ring was not a place of complete anarchy. If I call for help, and we act as official acquisitioners, then it won't matter if this is an immortal. He can't just defy the rules of the 5th star ring. The more people we have working together to deal with the sealing power, the better. I'll need Xianxia and Sir Star Ring. Their cultivation bases will be a lot of help. Having reached the conclusion that this was definitely the best idea, his eyes flashed and prepared to call out to them. But then the kelp shivered, and Xu Qing's jade slip vibrated as a message came in. It was Sir Star Ring. The Imperial clan of the Heliodorans are keeping some big secrets. I can sense that they have something I need. Unfortunately, they possess an exemption order from the spirit light heaven beyond heaven. Because of that order, their species can ignore the Department of Acquisitions. What's more, they have some powerful experts. At the moment, they're using that order to refuse us entry. Also, their powerful experts are a real threat. Xu Qing, I'm willing to share the item I need with you. 50-50. Do you dare to work with me on this? The message was a request for help, although it was worded very tersely. That just conformed to Sir Star Ring's proud personality. Xu Qing's eyebrows shot up. If Sir Star Ring was willing to ask for help, it indicated that he desperately needed the item in question. And it also meant that the powerful experts he mentioned were extremely strong. After some thought, Xu Qing sent a message back. I'll help you if you agree to help me with a situation over here afterward. Sir Star Ring didn't hesitate. He instantly responded. Deal. Deal. Xu Qing put away the jade slip and prepared to leave. But after some thought, he looked curiously at the kelp. Are you able to leave this place? Chapter 12-13. The Inheritance of 4th True Monarch. The Heliodoran Imperial clan in the Heliodora universe had once possessed amazing innate abilities. Originally, their skin was half crimson red and half azure blue, and they had 4 faces, one looking in each direction. They had also been huge. At birth, they would be 300 meters tall, and by the time they reached maturity, they would be 3,000 meters tall. Some would even eventually reach a height of 30,000 meters. Back then, their total population was vastly beyond most other species. In terms of cultivation, they didn't have special techniques. They inherited legacies through soul and blood, and could automatically absorb the ring source of the higher star ring. All of that was because their species descended from a true god. Years ago, their species had conquered the Heliodora universe, and had even spread their influence beyond that. In the past, they had been considered one of the central factors in the god cultivation system in the 5th star ring. Unfortunately, when immortals and gods waged war, the gods were eventually defeated. The immortals rose to power, and the Heliodorans' glory became a thing of the past. Their true god ended up imprisoned. And as a species, they withdrew from the war. In fact, they were one of the first species to surrender to the immortals. That was how they ended up surviving after the war ended. They were rewarded with the right to rule the Heliodora universe, and were also allowed to have an imperial clan, which in the end was quite an honor. There were similar imperial clans throughout the 5th star ring, but all of them existed because of similar arrangements. That said, all such species in the 5th star ring had bloodline restrictions placed on them. And thus, while the Heliodorans had once been dual-colored, their skin was now only a single color. And instead of having 4 faces, they had 2. Their full-grown height was also limited. They could now grow no taller than 300 meters. Something similar happened to their cultivation. Because of the limitations on their bloodline legacy, they lost their innate abilities. Eventually, they had to switch from the path of gods to that of cultivators. They had to learn to absorb spirit energy and could only strive for immortal ascension, not godly ascension. As generations passed, their 2-face trait disappeared, and their numbers decreased. In the end, members of the so-called Heliodoran Imperial clan were mostly about 30 meters tall, and they only had 1 face. But then the Aurora Immortal Palace went dark. The heaven beyond heaven had no lord, and finally, the Heliodoran Imperial clan had hope. Members of their species experienced ancestral awakenings, and they once again began to develop two faces, and they soon took over the universe. Right now, in the depths of the Heliodora universe, Sir Star Ring hovered outside of the Heliodoran's imperial palace. Chains of order swirled around him, and his face was cold as he looked at the palace. He was surrounded by countless Heliodorans, all of whom were 30 meters tall. They wore black armor and pulsed with baleful auras as they glared coldly at him. Directly in front of him, blocking the way to the imperial palace, were three figures. The three of them were over 200 meters tall, but not quite 300. One of them wielded a spear, one held a pagoda, and the last one had an enormous banner rising up behind him. Astonishingly, all of them pulsed with quasi-immortal auras. Something like this could never happen in any of the other heavens beyond heaven. Non-humans weren't allowed to achieve immortal ascension. In fact, they weren't even permitted to become quasi-immortals. But these three didn't just emit quasi-immortal auras. They also pulsed with the fluctuations of the gods. They were cultivating the path of both immortals and gods. As they stared at Sir Star Ring, the Heliodoran with the banner at his back spoke in a raspy voice. "Sire, you have fought with the three of us several times now, and every time it ends in a draw. What's the point of continuing? You people came to this universe to collect a certain amount of ring source. And yet, despite learning that we have an exemption medallion, you just keep pushing the issue. This is just too much. We Heliodorans have a bottom line. Sire, I suggest, you not do anything to harm your own interests." Sir Star Ring's expression was cold. He had been in this place for a while, but had only been able to fight up to this spot, no further. Any one of this group of three would be no problem for him to kill if he was fighting them alone. And if he had to fight too, he could wipe them out if he was willing to pay a heavy price. But three. They worked together too well, making it impossible for him to make any headway. In response to them, he coldly said, "It doesn't matter to me if we get enough ring source. It doesn't matter to me that your species has broken the rules. It doesn't matter to me if you achieve immortal ascension or godly ascension. In fact, it doesn't even matter to me who you have backing and protecting you. The same goes for that exemption medallion. I just want that lump of clay you have enshrined in your imperial palace." Sir Star Ring pointed directly at the palace off in the distance. The imperial palace glittered, and a yellow lump of clay floated up inside of it, sending terrifying pulses out into the starry sky that contained the might of heaven's principle. "You want this?" said a cold voice from within the palace, its tone mocking. It was the Emperor of the Heliodorans, who was 300 meters tall, pure red, and with two faces. "That's the inheritance of fourth true monarch. You can't have it." The Emperor waved his hand, and the clay with heaven's principle returned to him. Voice cold, he said, "Drive him away." The three Heliodorans who were blocking Sir Star Ring's path suddenly surged with energy. It was very clear that they possessed not just the will of immortals, but the will of gods. They started striding toward Sir Star Ring. The other surrounding Heliodorans pulsed with baleful auras, and all of the energy combined, surrounding Sir Star Ring and forming a total of 18 illusory statues wielding huge daggeraxes. Each of the 18 statues was 30,000 meters tall and pulsed with terrifying fluctuations. As they surrounded Sir Star Ring, they seemed to bear down on him with mountain-toppling, sea-draining force. Rumbling sounds echoed out loudly. Facing such opponents caused Sir Star Ring's eyes to blaze with killing intent, yet he still backed away. Of course, he had only been defeated once in his life, so despite facing so many powerful foes, he still wanted to fight. The chains of order swirled around him, and his cannon of balance erupted. He was ready to fight this battle all on his own. The two sides faced off, and neither seemed superior. The 18 statues and 3 quasi-immortals weren't capable of crushing Sir Star Ring. That was how valiant Sir Star Ring was. His cannon of order could maintain a sense of order between himself and enemies, and his cannon of balance could ensure that disparities between weak and strong could be smoothed out. The stronger his opponent was, the more his cannon of balance could bolster him and improve his battle prowess. Back when Xu Qing fought him, Xu Qing had to rely on his parallel universes and alternate versions of himself. That was how he had disrupted Sir Starring's balance. From that, it could be seen how strong Sir Starring was. A sigh of admiration echoed out from the imperial palace. You must be the strongest of the acquisitioners who came here. For someone so young to have battle prowess like that proves that you're truly a chosen. If you ever reach immortal ascension, you'll definitely be an extremely powerful immortal. I guess I can't blame you for coveting fourth true monarch's inheritance. It's a perfect fit for your canon. That so-called balance of yours is going to be hard to sustain for long periods of time. For you, using your balance to maintain peak fighting prowess is your top strategy in a fight. Sadly, you have nothing to sustain your strongest state. I suppose if I gave you this bit of Heaven's principle, it would be the missing link you need to perfect that strategy. Sir Starring didn't say a word in response. Originally, he had been about to say something. Well, I suppose I could give it to you. Become an ally of the Heliodoran dynasty and my personal vassal. Fight for us 3 times, and then I'll give you fourth true monarch's inheritance. Sir Starring looked coldly at the Emperor, as if he were looking at an ant. You think that you, a nothing species full of bloodline criminals, are worthy enough to have me as an ally? The surrounding Heliodorans glared at him with fury, and their baleful auras surged. Inside the palace, the Emperor laughed coldly. I'm not worthy. He extended his right hand and pointed out with his index finger. The starry sky surrounding the imperial palace distorted and blurred. The colors seemed to peel away, leaving behind only black and white. Within that black and white, a huge finger of ink appeared, which majestically pushed down toward Sir Starring. As it passed, the void shattered and the starry sky withered. A grim look appeared on Sir Starring as he backed up at top speed, all while performing a double-handed incantation gesture. He was getting ready to go all out. That was when a familiar voice echoed through the starry sky. You're right, you aren't worthy. Endless crimson light spilled out of nowhere, inundating the black and white and causing the colorless region to turn bright red. Within that red was a leafy kelp plant. It had a total of 12 leaves, which swayed back and forth like whips. Then they lashed toward the finger. A pop rang out. Unstoppable force surged forth, destroying the void and shattering the starry sky. The finger stopped moving and then dissipated. The 18 statues shivered and crumbled. The 3 Heliodoran experts looked shocked as they were sent tumbling backward, coughing up blood like mad. Inside the imperial palace, the previously composed Heliodoran emperor had the same expression on both faces: astonishment. Then his divine will swept out, converging outside of the palace into the form of a face that looked at the huge kelp plant. And it was looking at the young man in black standing on the kelp. The young man had his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes sparkled like stars as he looked calmly at the face. Unsurprisingly, the emperor recognized the kelp, and because he recognized it, he was shaken to the core. Prison A29 actually came with this guy. This guy's aura is clearly stronger than the fellow with the cannon of order. Don't tell me he's actually the leader of this acquisitioner squad. This was a different heaven beyond heaven, so the Heliodoran emperor wasn't as up-to-date on the news from the Nine Shores heaven. Meanwhile, Sir Starring did not suddenly feel calmer thanks to Xu Qing's arrival. In fact, quite the opposite, and that was because Xu Qing has gotten even stronger. Xu Qing was indeed stronger. Along the way, he had absorbed some of the ring source stored in other spacetimes. As of now, he was only a tiny sliver away from achieving major success in the undying illusory reality of the immortal embryo. And because of that improvement, his cannon was far mightier. As he stood on the kelp leaf looking at the huge face of the emperor, he coolly said, "Hand it over." 1214, there's ice here. Xu Qing said the words very calmly from atop the kelp leaf. It almost sounded like his voice aligned with the principles of nature, making what he said completely and utterly reasonable. There was no need for any additional prestige. It didn't matter that the only people present other than Sir Starring were the Heliodorans. In fact, the calmer he seemed, the greater and more intense the pressure felt by the Heliodorans. This was the 5th star ring, and humans reigned supreme. Outside of the Imperial Palace, the members of the Heliodoran Imperial Palace had grave expressions on their faces. A powerful enemy had arrived, and their hearts were sinking. They had already been convinced that Sir Star Ring was extremely strong. But now, a second powerful expert had shown up, and they were shaken deeply. Then there was the kelp plant. They were all fully aware that this was the true form of Prison A29. The fact that this person had brought the kelp plant with him, and that it would fight for him, was profoundly significant. They were all shaken with deep intensity. The Heliodorans were no longer glorious like they used to be. What was more, not one living member of their species had even witnessed that previous glory. The current generation had all been born under the rulership of humankind. It didn't matter that the Aurora heaven beyond heaven didn't have a lord. In their bones, these non-humans felt reverence for humankind. Because of the majesty of the Heliodoran emperor, they temporarily managed to suppress that reverence. But in the end, the pressure from a truly powerful human expert was too much for them. Xu Qing's calm but forceful arrival, and the words he spoke that still echoed in their ears, caused all of them to once again recall their reverence for humankind. Some of them instinctively bowed their heads. Deep in their blood, they were servants. Forcing non-humans into servitude was an important tool used by humans in the fifth star ring. The Heliodoran emperor knew that with absolute clarity. He said nothing. He looked at Xu Qing, and then his forehead glittered as a command medallion flew out of it. The medallion shone with gentle white light. Carved on its surface was the word exemption, while the other side was inscribed with spirit light. Years ago, the emperor said, our species was viewed with favor by the spirit light heaven beyond heaven when we recognized one of their great leaders as our lord. Thus, we were given this medallion that provides exemption from any type of order or tax. The white light from the exemption medallion spread out over the imperial palace, which served as the entrance to the Heliodorans' ancestral lands. The white light covered that entrance and cut everything off from it. The benefits of iodine, here, why you should keep it at home open. Xu Qing had heard about the exemption medallion from Sir Star Ring, but didn't know much about it. But the fact that it was a gift, and that the Heliodoran emperor had used it in the way he did, indicated that the medallion was very meaningful. Along the way, he had asked Zhou Jingli about it. Zhou Jingli had already researched the matter deeply, and had been happy to offer Xu Qing a full explanation. There were some species in the fifth star ring who, for various reasons, were awarded with exemption medallions. Normally speaking, when acquisitioners encountered such species, they had no choice but to leave them alone. However, Xu Qing's eyes glittered as he looked at the exemption medallion, then pulled out the special mission jade slip that Lord Poison had given him. I'm here on orders from immortal Lord Nineshores. My mission is to find a mysterious 9-colored ice that can extinguish the flame of a god lord. Looking coldly at the Heliodoran emperor, Xu Qing continued, this is a very important matter, and I suspect that your species has information. I'm going to perform an inspection immediately. The special mission jade slip glittered with pulses of light that swept out. When it contacted the white light from the exemption medallion, that light rippled. Then the white glow from the exemption medallion vanished. It no longer covered the imperial palace. The surrounding Heliodorans were so taken aback that they couldn't react. The emperor's face fell. This completely surpassed anything he could have guessed would happen. Normally speaking, all a species had to do was produce their exemption medallion, and the acquisitioners would have to back down. How could he ever have predicted that this human would be on a mission like this? It seemed outright absurd to him. How could immortal Lord Nineshores task someone with mere quasi-immortal battle prowess with collecting a type of ice that could extinguish the flame of a god lord? In fact, he refused to believe it. And yet, the mission jade slip's unique mark was truly one of a kind. Most importantly, the reaction of the exemption medallion was clearly true and real. The Heliodoran emperor's heart was pounding. That was because, even though his species had an exemption medallion, it obviously couldn't defy someone on a mission directly from immortal Lord Nineshores. It wasn't just the Emperor and the rest of the Heliodorans who were visibly taken aback. Sir Star Ring's gaze hardened as he looked at the mission jade slip Xu Qing was holding. Even he was caught by surprise by this turn of events. Xu Qing stepped off the kelp leaf and strode toward the imperial palace. His every footfall caused the starry sky to tremble. As he neared, the Emperor's face twitched. By the time Xu Qing had taken about 7 or 8 steps, the enormous projected face of the Emperor had vanished, and he had emerged from the palace in his true form. He was 300 meters tall, crimson, with 2 gruish faces, and he pulsed with terrifying cultivation base fluctuations that formed an obstacle in front of Xu Qing. 4H42 Min, the most disgusting food habits of politicians, more 19,297,123. Xu Qing stopped in place and looked at the Heliodoran Emperor. "You're preventing my inspection." Eyeing Xu Qing, the Emperor grimly said, "My species has no 9-colored ice. The inspection will prove that either true or false." The person to speak those words wasn't Xu Qing. It was Sir Star Ring. The Emperor only sighed. He knew that he had miscalculated. With the wave of his hand, he caused 4th True Monarch's inheritance to fly out of the palace and land on his hand. His hope was to patch things up. If these people wanted this item, then he might as well just give it to them. It was a precious treasure, but compared to what his species was really up to, it was better to just relinquish it. He was about to open his mouth to speak, when all of a sudden his face twitched. Xu Qing's gaze turned sharp as he looked in the direction of the imperial palace. At almost the exact same instant, the kelp sensed the same thing and began to sway and emanate a threatening aura. Teleportation fluctuations had suddenly begun to roll out from inside the palace. Someone was teleporting in. The Heliodoran Emperor's eyes narrowed, and he waved his hand. The clay with heaven's principle that he had been about to hand over returned to him, and he suddenly decided not to say the words he had been about to say. "An emissary from our species, patron, is arriving. We'll have to wait and see what the Heliodoran patron says about all this." With that, the Emperor turned and bowed in the direction of the palace. All of the other Heliodorans did the same. The teleportation fluctuations grew stronger. Rumbling sounds echoed out as a huge pillar of light shot down from the starry sky and into the palace, sending out numerous shockwaves. Xu Qing wasn't unfamiliar with this type of teleportation. It was the same variety that had brought him from his own universe. As the light descended, an aura very close to that of a lower immortal spread from the palace. The terrifying aura caused the starry sky to fold over itself as immortal energy took hold everywhere. Anything related to gods would be rejected by this immortal energy. It was the result of an immortal embryo. This newcomer was on the very cusp of transforming their immortal embryo and turning it into a mature immortal. Sir Star Ring's expression became very serious. Xu Qing frowned. Everyone watched as the main door of the imperial palace swung open. Mountain toppling, sea-draining force rippled out. It was like a volcano erupting with lava. A middle-aged cultivator appeared, clad in a crimson robe, with a cold expression on his face. His every step caused the starry sky to tremble. As he strode out into the open, the Heliodoran Emperor bowed deeply, and all of the other Heliodorans prostrated with deep respect. "Our respects, emissary." The terrifying aura of the emissary, plus the worshipful attitude of the Heliodorans, made for a very majestic scene. The swaying kelp plant instantly sent a message to Xu Qing via divine will. "That guy has the same aura as the warden that sealed the true god's wound." Xu Qing's eyes narrowed. The man in the crimson robe looked around with an indescribably majestic gaze. When he noticed the kelp, his eyes glittered. Then he shifted his attention to Xu Qing. "So, it was you that colluded with this traitorous plant to steal my master's god fodder." The Heliodoran Emperor blinked a few times. Sir Star Ring's expression turned grim, and the chains of order began to swirl around him. Chapter 12:15. Different routes to the same destination. Even as the cannon of order stirred around Sir Star Ring, and the chains of order filled the void around him, Xu Qing's gaze turned hard. "Watch out," he said, pointing in Sir Star Ring's direction. Sir Star Ring reacted with matchless speed, sending his chains of order out in front of him in a defensive array. Unfortunately, he wasn't quite fast enough. An astonishing force arrived before the chains. It was like planets shattering or universes quaking. A deafening boom rang out as Sir Star Ring's face went pale. Blood sprayed out of his mouth as he was sent spinning back like a kite with its string cut, his chains of order snapping and crumbling. Astonishingly, in the spot where the chains had been shattered stood a figure. It was a blurry figure who was poised to pursue Sir Star Ring, only for Xu Qing's finger to wave, causing space-time cannon to form a sealing power. The figure was blocked. However, that was only temporary. Xu Qing's space-time sealing wasn't strong enough to block the figure for more than a moment. Thankfully, that, coupled with the blockage of the chains of order, was enough to give Sir Star Ring a bit of breathing room. As Sir Star Ring tumbled back coughing up blood, he unleashed his cannon of balance, which gave him enough speed to temporarily avoid deadly danger. The figure lurched to a halt in the starry sky. He was now fully visible. He was none other than the middle-aged cultivator with the crimson robe who had just stepped out of the imperial palace. Left standing behind in the palace was a blurry afterimage. His true form had achieved incredible speed, appearing right in front of Sir Star Ring. If it hadn't been for Xu Qing's warning and assistance, Sir Star Ring would have been killed, or, at the very least, sustained a grievous injury. The cultivator turned to look at Xu Qing and coolly said, "You could see me moving. No wonder you have the gall to steal my master's god fodder." Xu Qing's eyes narrowed coldly. This was definitely the strongest quasi-immortal he had ever faced. As for his cannon, it wasn't very strange. In fact, it was downright simple. Speed, he was capable of moving so quickly that he surpassed time itself. Cannon wasn't classified by strength or weakness. It was more about who could push it farther, and who could understand it more deeply. "I originally wanted to kill this other guy so you would realize you can't run, and should just return the stolen property. But since you blocked my path, then I guess I will kill you after all." Even as the middle-aged cultivator's voice continued to drift out, he appeared only 9 meters in front of Xu Qing. That was a level of speed that surpassed the senses. He reached out with the intention of shoving his hand toward Xu Qing. As a result, he seized control of the space around Xu Qing, which became a vortex that erupted with a ripping force. And yet, only an instant later, the middle-aged cultivator's eyebrows shot up, and he made an exclamation of surprise. But he didn't fall back. Killing intent flared in Xu Qing's eyes. He had long since been prepared to act. While his opponent was speaking moments ago, his cannon of space had begun building up, and his cannon of time had sowed chaos. Together, they formed space-time and led to infinite timelessness. When his opponent closed in and created that vortex, the ripping force encountered Xu Qing's space-time. Without any fanfare at all, it was destroyed. Xu Qing shivered, and blood oozed out of the corners of his mouth. But he still lifted both hands and went into an incantation gesture. Suppress, freeze, seal. Space was suppressed, time was frozen, space-time was sealed. The starry sky around the middle-aged cultivator seemed to go rigid. All of the timelines solidified. The space-time they formed together was sealed, and everything around him seemed to become like amber. At the same time, Xu Qing shone with silver light as he was made manifest as his nearly completed immortal embryo. He was massive, like the true body of a god towering within the starry sky. He lifted his right hand and spread his 5 fingers wide to represent the 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, earth. The 5 extremes became ring source like 5 planets. It was as if his hand was an entire star system. They also resembled 5 gods. The power of the extremes then bore down on the immobilized middle-aged cultivator. Without the slightest hesitation, Sir Star Ring tapped into his cannon of balance, using all of his remaining strength to turn the starry sky into a set of scales. He was not doing it to bolster himself, but rather to bolster Xu Qing. He paid the price to strengthen Xu Qing. As a result, Xu Qing's battle prowess swelled, putting him extremely close to the peak of quasi-immortal. Next, the kelp emitted dazzling, rumbling sounds as its leaves unleashed its innate ability. Its innate ability was that of sealing, and it didn't seal space, but rather ring source. It was going all out, both to bolster Xu Qing and to bolster the sealing. As they weakened and he got stronger, Xu Qing spread his 5 fingers, causing something like the might of heaven to descend. The immobilized cultivator slowly looked up at Xu Qing. Eyes shining with a strange, meaningful light, he said, "I think I know who you are. You're that Xu Qing." The middle-aged cultivator licked his lips, then lifted his own right hand, put it in front of himself, and pinched his fingers together. That action caused cracking sounds to ring out. Space shattered, time cracked, space-time crumbled. Then he relaxed his fingers, only to pinch them together even harder. Sir Starring trembled from head to toe and coughed up a huge mouthful of blood. His balance, in the shape of scales, started crumbling. However, Sir Starring was an extraordinary individual, and thus, streams of starlight appeared around him, and every single stream was connected to a star ring pagoda. By fully catalyzing their strength, he sent starlight streaming forth to sustain himself and slow down the crumbling of the scales. That ensured that Xu Qing would be bolstered by balance for a bit longer. The kelp's leaves were shattering, and it was shaking violently. But the rips and tears in the leaves immediately sprouted little vines that snaked out and wrapped around the middle-aged cultivator. The ceiling was being changed into a binding. And yet there was more. Starfear suddenly appeared in the starry sky, and her god altar became golden light. A divine likeness appeared, which unleashed full power. The middle-aged cultivator suddenly started transforming into clay. At the same time, the light of innumerable stars shone above and crushed down onto him. Ads by Pobrev. They were all trying to create an opportunity for Xu Qing. This cultivator was truly astonishing in terms of speed and battle prowess. He was at the peak of quasi-immortal, just a step away from being a lower immortal. Although that one step would be incredibly difficult to complete, it was no exaggeration to say that when a cultivator reached this level, they were extraordinarily powerful, strong enough to destroy all obstacles in their way. And this cultivator's cannon was the simple yet terrifying cannon of speed. The reason that cannon was considered to be simple was that it was actually connected to many other types of cannon, and it had many applications. What this cultivator was revealing now was only a small portion of what it was capable of. Therefore, though everyone else was participating in this fight, Xu Qing was the one with the greatest battle prowess, and thus he was the best weapon. And the best tactic at the moment was to create an opportunity for that weapon. All of this takes quite a bit of time to explain, but in reality, everything happened in the time it takes a spark to fly off a piece of flint. An instant later, the efforts of Sir Starring, Starfear, and the kelp bought enough time for Xu Qing's 5 fingers to fall all the way down. The starry sky shook. Those 5 fingers were like gods or planets. They unleashed a galactic power that was all focused on the middle-aged cultivator. And yet, no deafening sound resulted. The fingers and the palm fell, brimming with the power of the 5 elements. It looked like a killing move, but in actuality it was. This was also a sealing. This was Xu Qing's tactic. By using the 5 extremes of the 5 elements, he created the foundation of a lower star ring. Then, he combined time, space, order, and balance, as well as fetters of ring source. This was an extreme sealing. For the first time, the middle-aged cultivator's pupils constricted. He instinctively felt great danger, and thus he blurred as he tapped into his cannon of speed. He wasn't hesitating at all. He was immediately trying to take his cannon to a higher level of use. It was something that surpassed space, time, space-time, and walked a path that wasn't aligned with parallelism. In certain respects, his cannon and Xu Qing's cannon were different routes to the same destination. The difference was that he was not choosing the complicated route of parallelism. He was doing something far more direct. It was something that lower immortals would comprehend, but not beings under that level, with the exception of people like Xu Qing, whose enlightenment had led him in that same direction. And as a result, Xu Qing was shaken by what he saw. His path. Xu Qing had long been searching for a 10th extreme. He had worked hard, but hadn't made any progress. But now he felt like he was in a dark world in which light had just appeared. Sadly, given the current circumstances, there was no time for thinking or planning. He had to put that inspiration aside for later. Next came his true killing move. A bell tolled. It was the toll of a bell that contained a scrap of God-Lord power, something that could devastate all magics. The starry sky went blank. The quasi-immortal cultivator shivered. What appeared next contained heaven's principle, parallelism, and the canons of Xu Qing's immortal body. It corresponded perfectly to his immortal embryo. It was an iron skewer, and it wasn't just one. One after another, iron skewers emerged in parallel spacetimes. In total, there were 479 of them. Like shooting stars, they began shifting from being illusory to corporeal. Ultimately, all 479 combined into a single iron skewer at Xu Qing's command. He sent it out in a lethal attack. It shot right toward the middle-aged cultivator. The cultivator fell back. He fled at top speed. He fled through time. He fled through space. He fled through the past, present, future, through fate and karma, through lineaments and memories. He fled through everything. But the iron skewer made from 479 skewers was guided by the tolling of the bell. Nothing could stop it. It pierced space. It shattered time. It crushed past, present, and future. It penetrated fate and passed through karma. It devastated lineaments and memories. It passed through everything as it honed in on its target. It caught up and stabbed him through the forehead. The moment it hit him, ripples spread out from his forehead, which turned into a surface of water. A blurry reflection became visible. Put precisely, it was a figure with its back turned away, a figure whose aura surpassed that of a quasi-immortal, and whose presence caused the entire surrounding universe to tremble. It was an immortal. It was the middle-aged cultivator's master. This was a life-saving projection that had been implanted in him. The figure looked over its shoulder. It cast a single glance at the iron skewer. That single glance caused the skewer to tumble off to the side, completely out of control. Blood sprayed out of Sir Starring's mouth. Starfare's god altar destabilized. The kelp started crumbling. Xu Qing's mind filled with rumbling sounds. Taking advantage of the moment, the middle-aged cultivator finally managed to evade death. Retreating at top speed, he put distance between himself and his opponent. Though he was glaring at Xu Qing, his heart still pounded with lingering fear. Then he said, "Emperor Heliodora, I command you and your species to help me. Attack." The Emperor's expression flickered, and inside he hesitated. If this were a simple matter of attacking a human, he wouldn't think twice. But this emissary's demand went beyond that. He wanted the Heliodorans to kill this human. As the Heliodoran Emperor tried to decide what to do, Xu Qing managed to clear his head. Looking at the middle-aged cultivator coldly, he said, "You're out of chances." Xu Qing looked up into the starry sky. At that exact moment, the starry sky trembled, and a huge rift was sliced open. People emerged. In the lead was Zhou Jingli. Following him were Yuan Shensu, Li Mengtu, Sir Vilespirit, and more. All of the ascendees, acquisitioners all, had come. Another thing Xu Qing had done on the way was have Zhou Jingli go out with orders for these people, just in case. If nothing else, Xu Qing would need them afterward to deal with the true god. Under Zhou Jingli's leadership, they had ripped open the starry sky to arrive here. Chapter 12:16. Are you serious? A tempest wind blasted out of the massive rift that had been torn open in the starry sky. It was as if a huge hand had ripped it open. The entire void around the Heliodoran Imperial Palace was shaking. Cultivator after cultivator arrived, all of them pulsing with baleful auras. All of them had benefited to varying degrees thanks to Ring Source. Clearly, Xu Qing wasn't the only one to have made progress recently. The other cultivators had clearly done well. All of them had improved their cultivation bases since arriving. As a group, their battle prowess was far beyond anything from before. That was especially true of Sir Vilespirit and Zhou Jingli, both of whom had previously been at the peak of imperial sovereign and were now just a breath away from a breakthrough. Li Mengtu wasn't quite on that level, but he had still advanced significantly compared to before. Hordeslayer and Rampart were both in high spirits. However, the person whose cultivation base had improved the most was Xianxia. It was hard to say where she had gone to do it, but her immortal embryo was far stronger than before. Because of all that, this group of cultivators was definitely capable of shifting the tide of this battle. Considering that all of them were ascendees, they had all survived countless deadly fights to get to this point. Even when acting as lone wolves, they were still dangerous. Now that they were here, their auras surged, and they were clearly ready for ruthless combat. They were a force no one would dare to take lightly. Their gazes flitted to take in the Heliodoran Emperor and the quasi-immortal cultivator. All of the other Heliodorans were shaken and suddenly got very uneasy feelings. The Emperor scowled. This was the exact worst-case scenario he had wanted to avoid. Normally speaking, the chances of something like this were slim to none. Considering the Emperor had an exemption medallion, he wasn't worried about acquisitioners showing up. At the very worst, he might have to pay them off to avoid trouble. That was why he had initially acted so fearlessly. Yet none of his countless calculations could have prompted him to predict that Xu Qing would be on a mission for the immortal lord. That was the key to everything. Furthermore, his battle prowess was shocking, and he didn't even seem scared of this emissary. In fact, he had seemed just on the verge of killing him. What's more, every single one of the people who just showed up, whether in terms of aura or just the sense I get from them, are obviously chosen. This squadron of acquisitioners is full of extraordinary individuals. That thought struck fear into the heart of the Heliodoran Emperor. Meanwhile, the quasi-immortal cultivator was sighing in his heart. He knew all about Xu Qing's background. He had a very different identity than the Heliodoran Emperor, so he knew much more about what was happening in various heavens beyond heaven. He had already heard that all of the new ascendees had become acquisitioners. After all, the population of the heavens beyond heaven also included native cultivators who were born and raised there. In fact, they formed the majority of the population. Normally speaking, only 10% of a squadron like this would be made of ascendees, as the ascendees would just replace people who were eliminated for one reason or another. But this group of ascendees was different. On previous occasions, ascendees were usually sent out to different departments on different assignments. It was very rare for an entire group of them to be assigned to do the same thing. In fact, this was the first time in history that a group of ascendees had all been assigned to form a squadron in the Department of Acquisitions. And thus, the arriving acquisitioners caused the middle-aged cultivator to sigh. This was one reason why he had acted so decisively, and even gone so far as to demand assistance from the Heliodorans. He knew that he couldn't afford any delays. He needed to act quickly. It was true that he had an impressive background, and had even been on the path to becoming an ascendee himself. But who here didn't have an impressive background? And even those who didn't, but still managed to get to the heavens beyond heaven, obviously had access to destined opportunities. Thus, it didn't matter that he was a quasi-immortal with a lower immortal master. He knew full well that when dealing with a group like this, he might be able to provoke one or two of them individually and could possibly even kill them. But if he had to deal with the whole group, not even his master would dare to do that. So he quickly retreated to the Imperial Palace, where he would use the teleportation portal to go back home. He wasn't going to worry any further about what was happening here. A fight like this was not something he could win in a short time. Another reason he chose to leave was that the situation was simply too unfavorable, and he was not confident he could solve it with force, and any slip-up could lead to his own death, so he decided to retreat. Xu Qing was not surprised by his decision. Only a complete fool would fail to retreat in the face of so many opponents. That was especially true considering how close he had come to dying moments ago. But do you really think you can leave just like that? Eyes flashing coldly, he pointed out with his finger. Send him on his way. Zhou Jingli's aura surged, and he replied, "Follow orders." Li Mengtu didn't hesitate to attack. Sir Vilespirit blinked a few times, but he was familiar with how Xu Qing operated. Considering he wasn't in danger of losing his life, he joined in the attack. Yuanshan Su didn't hesitate to unleash her full battle prowess. All of this had started because of Sir Star Ring, so he naturally went all out. Hordeslayer and Rampart saw Sir Star Ring taking action. They were grateful to him, and they were in awe of Xu Qing, so they attacked with full force. Although they all had their own thoughts and considerations, they were united in the moment, so they all unleashed their cultivation bases and used their trump cards. Nearly 100 Ascendees launched killing moves, which became like asteroids, combining into a shining force that shook the universe. It raged toward the Heliodoran Imperial Palace with mountain-toppling, sea-draining force. Nothing could stop it. Even if the Imperial Palace had been made with more impressive materials, it couldn't stand up to that force. In the blink of an eye, it shattered into dust. It revealed the entrance to the Heliodoran ancestral land, as well as the middle-aged cultivator, who had just been starting to blur away on the teleportation portal. His face fell, and blood sprayed out of his mouth. And as the teleportation was interrupted, his entire body distorted. All he could do was willingly sustain injuries to use his master's mark to forcefully complete the teleportation. An instant later, he vanished. Xu Qing looked at the spot coldly. He felt no regret. If the man was gone, he was gone. He was, after all, a peak quasi-immortal. I'll just kill him next time I see him. Xu Qing looked over at the Heliodoran Emperor. So did the other Acquisitioners. The Emperor shivered deep inside, and then, without a bit of hesitation, he dropped to his knees and bowed to Xu Qing. Lifting up both hands, he held out the inheritance of fourth true monarch. "Our humble species has erred," he said loudly. "Please take this item to assuage your anger." The Emperor was truly nervous, and was really out of options. He was about to continue speaking when Xu Qing waved his hand. The clump of yellow clay flew into Xu Qing's hand. After fiddling with it for a moment, he split it in half, keeping some for himself and giving the rest to Sir Star Ring. "Many thanks for your help, all of you," he said calmly. "I was given a mission by the Immortal Lord to look for a 9-colored piece of ice that can extinguish the flame of a god lord. I noticed something suspicious about this species. I hope I can trouble you to inspect their ancestral land for me." The Ascendees' eyes lit up. They understood what was at stake, so it was with great enthusiasm that they shot into the ancestral land of the Heliodorans. Xu Qing waited outside and continued to fiddle with the heaven's principal clay. The Heliodoran Emperor's complexion shifted as his anxiety built. Unfortunately, he was in a completely powerless position right now, and then his face flickered even more dramatically. Sir Star Ring had just emerged from the entrance to the Heliodoran ancestral land, a quizzical expression on his face. "We found something unusual, something with 9 colors. Do you want to take a look for yourself?" Xu Qing actually looked surprised. "Are you serious?" Sir Star Ring hesitated. "I'm not totally sure what it is, but I can tell it's connected to the Aurora Immortal Palace." Chapter 12:17. 9-colored ice coffin. Xu Qing had a hard time believing that the pretext he had thrown out was actually true, and that the Heliodora universe actually had the 9-colored ice that Immortal Lord Nineshores sought. If things turned out to be that simple, then the mission from Immortal Lord Nineshores was going to turn out to be little more than child's play. What was more, he would need to completely rethink his judgment of Poison Monarch. But no matter how he considered the situation, it seemed extremely unlikely that the 9-colored ice he sought was really here. With such thoughts on his mind, he put away the heaven's principal clay he had been toying with. However, he didn't immediately enter the Heliodoran ancestral land. Instead, he turned to look at the Heliodoran Emperor prostrating to him. The Emperor's eyes were wide with disbelief, and he was trembling. He was fully aware that if he didn't provide a very clear explanation, then his entire species would likely be damned by myriad tribulations. This was something related to an immortal lord. Not even his patron would utter a peep considering these circumstances. Noticing Xu Qing looking at him, he immediately called, "Exalted One, this is a misunderstanding. I know what this fellow Taoist is talking about, and it's definitely not the 9-colored ice referred to by immortal Lord Nineshores. It's a remnant of the Aurora Immortal Palace. In our species, efforts to memorialize the Aurora Immortal Palace, we paid a huge price to fish a coffin out of the void. It's true that the coffin is made of ice, and it also has 9 colors, but it's not the thing you're looking for." In his anxiety, the Emperor wasn't hiding anything. He explained everything openly. Xu Qing's face remained expressionless as he said, "I'll find out one way or another by checking in person. Right now, all members of the Heliodorine species, from the Emperor on high to the lowliest member, will produce a drop of soul blood. Any who resist will be killed on the spot." Sir Starring bristled aggressively, as did the kelp plant and Starfear. The Heliodorine Emperor hesitated only briefly. He was a decisive individual, and he knew that he couldn't afford any more misunderstandings. It didn't seem like this request was an attempt to wipe out his species more easily. It was more like collateral. This person was worried about unexpected things happening in the ancestral land. The Emperor gritted his teeth, then reached up to his forehead and extracted some soul blood. He then indicated orders to be sent to the rest of his species. His heart was full of bitterness. The other Heliodorines quietly extracted their own soul blood. The soul blood converged in front of Xu Qing. Waving his hand, he sent it to Starfire. "You stay out here," he said. "If anything happens to us inside, wipe out all of the Heliodorines." Starfire nodded gravely, collected up the soul blood, and then sent Godly Might out to cover the Heliodorines. Xu Qing still didn't feel completely confident that he had enough collateral, so he looked at the kelp plant. He still didn't completely trust the kelp. Eyes narrowing, he sent it a message via divine will, telling it to seal the Heliodorine Emperor and then go with him into the ancestral land. The kelp seemed to be muttering to itself, but it did choose to send out a leaf, which became a sealing mark on the Emperor. The Emperor didn't dare to resist. Having done all that, Xu Qing took the kelp plant and the sealed Emperor with him as he followed Sir Star Ring into the entrance. The Heliodorine's ancestral land was in a hidden galaxy. A bird's eye view of the place revealed countless heavenly bodies and flickering natural laws. One point of light stuck out to Xu Qing. He sent out his divine will, which caused the galaxy to expand rapidly in front of him. Larger and larger it grew from his perspective, and the process didn't slow down. It grew immense until ultimately his view passed numerous planets and heavenly bodies. Then his gaze hardened. In the very middle of the galaxy, in the spot he had noticed earlier, there were 5 enormous figures seated cross-legged. They were all Heliodorines. They were enormous and multicolored with many faces, but they were all withered up. They were corpses, and they were the corpses of gods. Put precisely, these were god corpses belonging to the Heliodorine species. In the middle of the 5 corpses was a planet. It was completely frozen in ice. There was no life on the planet, only a coffin. And that coffin was made of ice that radiated a 9-colored glow. A number of ascendees had gathered in that area, and their eyes gleamed as they observed the situation. None were making any moves. "That setup is unusual," Sir Star Ring said. Xu Qing looked at it thoughtfully. The Heliodorine Emperor quickly offered an explanation. "Exalted One, those corpses are gods that were members of our species long ago. After we surrendered to the Immortals, we were assigned the mission of keeping their bloodline suppressed. Countless years have passed since then, and we've stuck to the mission the entire time. We've never wavered. The coffin is there to keep them more firmly suppressed. After all, if they were somehow resurrected, they obviously wouldn't approve of our species. In fact, the first thing they would do would be to devour all of us." Sir Star Ring eyed the Emperor of the Heliodorines. He had heard of similar situations before. The 5th star ring was full of many species who were tasked with suppressing their ancestral gods. "Interesting," Xu Qing said calmly. "And you say you've never wavered." The Emperor's heart thumped in his chest. "Exalted One," he said carefully, "what exactly do you mean by that?" Sir Star Ring looked at Xu Qing. Xu Qing's eyes glittered as he realized what was going on. To the cultivators of the 5th star ring, the suppression of gods was important. That was why the star ring lacked mutagen and abounded with immortal energy. That was also why the species here couldn't cultivate the path of gods. Because of that, old-timers would probably understand what they were looking at here. But more modern generations of cultivators would never have seen anything like it and would have no idea what they were looking at. But Xu Qing was not ordinary. He came from the 9th star ring. In the revered ancient mainland, the gods wreaked havoc, and there were many species who outright worshipped gods. What was more, Xu Qing had personally witnessed multiple instances of godly ascension. Whether it was the godchild of Crimson Mother, Empress Summer Departure, or that situation in the Gast Hollow, they all gave him similar sensations, and that was why he instantly realized what he was looking at. This was obviously a godly ascension ceremony. However, based on what he could tell, this ceremony was incomplete. It wasn't very impressive. It's been hidden. Eyes narrowing, he waved his hand, and a band of silver light emerged from his immortal embryo. Silver was the color of immortals. Gods absorbed ring source and emitted holy golden light. That was why Xu Qing always saw gods covered with golden light. But when cultivators absorbed ring source, they emitted silver light. A stream of silver immortal light swirled in Xu Qing's palm, and then he flicked his hand. The light shot into the galaxy, where it merged with some starlight, turning it silver. The silver spread. It didn't fill the entire galaxy. It just filled the galaxy's starlight. Gradually, one stream of starlight after another turned silver. From Xu Qing's high vantage point, it looked like a silver web spreading throughout the galaxy. Then Xu Qing waved his hand to adjust it, and the different bright and dark spots in the web shifted until it revealed an astonishing spell formation. The spell formation was just as large as the galaxy itself, and it connected all of the planets. In the middle of all that were the 5 corpses and the ice coffin. They formed 2 forces, one on the inside and one on the outside. In that manner, a huge convergence of ring source was created. When the Heliodoran Emperor saw what was happening, his face went pale. Sir Star Ring also reacted with visible surprise. Then Xu Qing spoke. Originally, this was all designed for the suppression effort you mentioned, but you used that as the foundation to build something much bigger. You created a godly ascension ceremony. Unfortunately, it's not complete. Because of that, the godly ascension won't work. Do you have an explanation for this, Emperor? Xu Qing turned to look at the ashen-faced Emperor. Trembling from head to toe, the Emperor dropped to his knees. Exalted One, I would never dare to allow my species to attempt godly ascension. All of this was set up to purify the blood of our species. The Emperor didn't dare to hide anything further. How could he ever have guessed that this secret attempt at godly ascension in the 5th star ring would be identified so easily? That's not important, Xu Qing said. He reached out and clenched his hand into a fist. A cracking sound rang out through the starry sky. Silver light flared from the spell formation as several key sections were broken. The ceremony was thus crippled. Sir Star Ring, said Xu Qing, you can lead people onto the planet now. Take that coffin, and have everyone prepare to absorb the ring source that will come as a result. Sir Star Ring nodded and flew toward the planet. Xu Qing waited quietly. Before long, he watched as the planet of ice trembled. Then a huge eruption of ring source swept through the galaxy. The ceremony had been destroyed. Afterwards, Sir Star Ring and Zhou Jingli returned, dragging with them the 9-colored ice coffin. Xu Qing knew what it was as soon as he laid eyes on it. No one else would have any idea what it was, because it hadn't been in the reflected history of the Aurora Immortal Palace. But Xu Qing had possessed young Lord Aurora, so his memories contained information about it. After young Lord Aurora was born, his parents put him to sleep until after the gods had been subjugated. And to do that, they created a coffin. It does look like it's made from 9-colored ice, but this is probably not the item immortal Lord Nineshores is looking for. Xu Qing put the coffin away and turned to leave. He didn't care if the emperor's explanation was the truth or not, nor did he have any need to collect any of the ring source from this place. With Zhou Jingli around, Xu Qing was confident that the other ascendees would be able to collect it, all while keeping an appropriate amount for themselves. They would definitely benefit a lot. This matter is concluded. We also have enough ring source for our mission. So next, we're going to the real feast that occurs after the banquet is over. The true god. With that, he turned to leave the Heliodoran ancestral land. Chapter 12:18. Ambition and Position. A day later, outside the crumbled Heliodoran imperial palace, the emperor prostrated with a bitter expression on his face. The other Heliodorans flanking him were ashen and visibly weak. The three who had previously blocked the path of Sir Star Ring had blood oozing out of the corners of their mouths and seemed incredibly dispirited. Their cultivation bases had declined. They were no longer quasi-immortals, but rather had fallen down to the imperial sovereign level. Close examination would reveal that they weren't the only ones who had been affected like that. The other Heliodorans had all experienced a decline in cultivation base to varying degrees, and based on their soul fluctuations, the decline was permanent. It came from their souls and their blood. Their bloodline had been pared down, and their souls had been restricted. Even the emperor himself had been affected. Although he was still a quasi-immortal, it was a constant struggle for him to stay in that level. Unfortunately, this situation wasn't likely to change. That was because his extra face had withered up. His ancestral awakening had been interrupted. And yet, the other Heliodorans still chose to defer to him, despite the resentment they felt in their hearts. A group of people was flying past them in the starry sky. They were the Ascendees. In the lead was Xu Qing. They were leaving. The Heliodorans' ceremony was about purifying blood and stockpiling ring source. But the Ascendees had taken the stockpile and split it up according to the quota established by Xu Qing. Zhou Jingli took the lead in handing over 20% of what he had collected. Li Mengtu and the others quickly followed suit. As for the Heliodoran imperial clan, Sir Star Ring used his powers of order and his canon of balance on them. In doing so, he ensured that the bloodline would remain impure. Given the Heliodorans' errant behavior, if events here had affected other heavens beyond heaven, it would have been necessary to report the matter, and the species would likely have been wiped out. Instead, their bloodline had been pared down. As a result, it didn't matter what got reported at this point. The actions of Xu Qing and the other Ascendees conformed perfectly with big human organizations in the fifth star ring. No one could blame them for doing anything wrong. Besides, their actions fell in line with what everyone expected from the Department of Acquisitions. In fact, this entire thing seemed to be something of an assessment. Even the Heliodorans realized that. They knew that in terms of a squadron of Ascendees like this, their species didn't measure up in battle prowess, background, or anything else for that matter. Their species was simply unlucky to have clashed with people like that. If the squadron had felt like simply exterminating them as a species, they would have had nowhere to run to. Humankind was paramount in the fifth star ring, so when all was said and done, they were actually a bit relieved at how things had ended. The fact that their species could continue living was a blessing on its own. Things had been wrapped up. Now Xu Qing led everyone back to prison A29. Along the way, he explained to the rest of the squadron what he had learned about the true godson and also what he planned to do. When everyone realized that the kelp plant was actually the jailer in charge of A29 and that there was a chance they could extract ring source from a true god, they started to get excited. They had already collected enough ring source to meet the qualifications for the mission, and all of them had managed to build up significant personal stockpiles, but they all still needed a lot of ring source. As a result, their eyes began to shine brightly. The recent experience of working together to invade another species and split the loot had caused all of them to warm up to each other significantly. And they all approved of having Xu Qing as their leader. Considering that Xu Qing had a peak level of battle prowess and was leading them to get more ring source, their approval grew even stronger. They soon arrived at prison A29. The true god sun was still in the same spot. The kelp had come with Xu Qing as its true form, but hadn't dared to be derelict in duty, so it had left behind a clone to keep an eye over things in the prison. Upon returning, Xu Qing suppressed his anticipation, quickly scanned the area to make sure nothing unexpected had happened while he was away, then turned to the ascendees. "Now we go forward with the plan to collect the ring source," Xu Qing said. Sir Star Ring and all the others had been informed of the plan on the way. Now that they were present to see and sense everything personally, their eyes were shining with anticipation and determination. Without another word, Xu Qing shot toward the sun. The kelp clone's roots wriggled aside to make an opening, all while the true form provided a boost to everyone as they followed Xu Qing. Zhou Jingli, Sir Vilespirit, Yuan Shensu, and Li Mengtu were among them. Before long, the Acquisitioner Squadron had entered the sun like a pack of hungry wolves. Time passed. 3 days later, the sun started trembling, and the kelp plant outside swayed back and forth violently. It lasted for 7 days. Rumbling echoed out into the starry sky, thanks to the violet ring source fluctuations from the sun. Apparently, the sealing mark had been broken. A few more days passed. The sun was starting to get less fiery and hot. It was even shrinking. Apparently, there was going to be another eruption of ring source. However, that was when an intense stream of divine will swept through the interior of the sun. It turned into a voice. "All of you, that's enough. This fodder is mine to take away. You have 10 breaths of time to get the hell out of here. Any who remain after that will die here, and neither your masters nor your backing organizations will have any cause to blame me." The thunderous voice shook the entire Heliodora universe. Countless galaxies and planets shook, and all living beings trembled. Even Xu Qing and the other ascendees were stricken with fear. After all, they had invaded this true god sun. Coughing up blood and facial expressions flickering, they fell into retreat. By the time the 10 breaths of time had passed, they were outside of the sun. The moment they appeared out in the starry sky, a huge vortex opened up beneath the true god sun. It looked like a gigantic mouth. Then a gargantuan hand stretched out, grabbed the sun, and dragged it into the vortex. The kelp had no choice but to loosen its grip via the roots, otherwise it would have been dragged inside as well. All of this takes some time to describe, but from the moment the ascendees appeared out in the open to when the vortex and hand appeared, only an instant passed. Then the hand dragged the sun into the vortex, and they all disappeared. It was as if nothing had ever been in that spot. The only thing left behind was the quivering kelp, as well as Xu Qing and the ascendees, all of them scowling. Everyone seemed to be at a loss for words. After going inside, they had encountered some difficulties breaking through the 2 sealing marks from before. But things had generally gone smoothly, and they had managed to absorb quite a bit of ring source from the true god. Unfortunately, when they opened the 3rd sealing mark, something unexpected happened. There was an eye in the 3rd sealing mark. It was the eye of an immortal, and it was the true form of the sealing mark restraining the true god sun. The moment they spotted the eye, it opened and unleashed a terrifying tempest-like will. None of them had been able to stand up to it. There was no doubt as to its identity. It belonged to the lower immortal who was responsible for the entire situation. Clearly, he had once been a minor government official in the Aurora Heaven Beyond Heaven, and upon learning from his apprentice that something was going on, he erupted into a fury. And he had given them 10 breaths of time to leave. Not being willing to leave the true god sun behind, he had paid a heavy price to take it away. Apparently, the lower immortal hadn't been able to do anything else but that. And there wasn't anything Xu Qing and the others could have done either. They weren't strong enough to challenge a lower immortal. All they could do was sigh and leave. The kelp plant looked confused. The prison it had been guarding was gone. The gods in its leaves had been taken away by the warden. Now it had no mission left in this world. In response to Xu Qing's suggestion, it left with them. Eventually, they ran into an asteroid field. There, they all selected asteroids where they settled cross-legged to work on digesting the ring source they had taken. They would leave the universe in a month, Though they had only taken the ring source from behind 2 sealing marks, that was still a significant amount. Half a month went by quickly. The asteroid field drifted quietly through the starry sky. During the time that passed, the Ascendees all improved their cultivation bases and battle prowess thanks to the ring source. Their auras were now much fiercer than before. When the 17th day came, a magnificent aura suddenly spread through the floating asteroid field. The aura was so strong it threw the asteroids into chaos. Space-time rippled. The 5 elements merged. The natural law of the universe stirred, converging into a dazzling, multicolored display. Deafening rumbling sounds echoed out, like the thump of a heartbeat or the crash of heavenly thunder. Everyone was shaken deeply. Even as they sat there cross-legged, they opened their eyes and looked in the direction of the disturbance. On an elliptical asteroid, someone sat cross-legged in a black robe, with violet hair flying around him. He was shining with bright light and pulsing with explosive immortal energy. He was none other than Xu Qing. Sir Starring's eyes shone brightly. He's breaking through to quasi-immortal. That energy, those fluctuations. Sir Vilespirit's expression was grave. Yuanshan Su seemed stunned. Li Mengtu was already scanning the area for threats, as he took it upon himself to stand as Dharma protector for Xu Qing. Hordeslayer and Rampart seemed nervous and even scared. They had their own ideas about what this meant. If Xu Qing became a quasi-immortal, then all he had to do was lift his hand, and the 2 of them would become immortal swords that would excitedly rush to his call. And thus, their anxiety was building. That was when Zhou Jingli's eyes narrowed with determination. Standing, he flew over to an asteroid near Xu Qing and sat down cross-legged. Looking stern, he said, "What are the lot of you doing? Stand as Dharma protectors right now. And if any of you are thinking of trying to pull some sort of fast one, let me just remind you." Zhou Jingli's eyes shone with a mysterious light, that this heaven beyond heaven has a name. Remember what it is. The leadership positions in the other heavens beyond heaven are filled. All of you understand what that means. So, regardless of what the lot of you are thinking, I can tell you that my goal is to seize a leadership spot in this heaven beyond heaven without a lord. Although the chances are small, they do exist. Considering the possible benefits, I'm willing to take a chance. And that's why anyone who poses a threat to my chances will be considered an enemy. This was the first time Zhou Jingli had openly stated his ambitions. Although no one could be absolutely sure that he was telling the truth, there was no doubt that his words stirred the hearts of everyone present. Hordeslayer and Rampart suddenly weren't feeling very scared. After initially looking stunned, their eyes shone. Leadership spot? Chapter 12:19, an unheard-of quasi-immortal. Hordeslayer and Rampart were moved. The brothers exchanged a glance, and then simultaneously looked over at Sir Starring. Sir Starring's face was completely expressionless, but he had turned his back to Xu Qing's asteroid, indicating he was going to accept the role of Dharma protector. The 2 brothers' spirits lifted. Sword energy soared up. Astonishingly, they chose to transform into 2 ancient immortal swords that glittered in the starry sky as their points shifted to face outward. They were also positioning themselves as loyal guards, watching over their master. Zhou Jingli smiled in response, all while his eyes glittered in a way that was both obsequious and amiable. Sir Vilespirit snorted coldly in his heart, all while musing that these 2 swords had cultivated themselves into insanity. He also wondered why a lower immortal had taken people like that as apprentices, and how they had reached a similar level as himself. However, that was all inside. When he noted Zhou Jingli's actions, his eyes narrowed. Then, after some consideration, he closed his eyes. Zhou Jingli smiled again, and then turned to look at Yuanshan Su. As far as he was concerned, Yuanshan Su was very important. Although it seemed on the surface that she wasn't very strong, a far cry from Sir Vilespirit and Sir Starring, the reality was that she had exceptional battle prowess. And whether it was things he had learned about her in the past, or her behavior in the Aurora Immortal Palace, he knew that there was more to her than met the eye. In fact, upon analyzing everything that happened in the Aurora Immortal Palace, there was no doubt that if Xu Qing hadn't been there, she would have been the one to survive the longest. That was especially considering that she was a female cultivator, and she was a very pretty female cultivator. As far as Zhou Jingli was concerned, there was every reason to believe she would eventually become an astounding phoenix among women. Therefore, his gaze was filled with respect. Yuanshan Su said nothing. She just settled into her role as Dharma protector. Zhou Jingli looked away. As for the rest of the acquisitioners, considering that the strongest among them were clearly siding with Xu Qing, it only lent further weight to their approval of him. Soon, the people who had harbored ill intentions quashed them. Everyone acted as Dharma protectors. In that manner, time passed. The immortal energy fluctuations coming off Xu Qing grew stronger. The immortal energy spread out into the starry sky, eventually provoking a reaction from the universe's magical laws. At the same time, his immortal embryo began to manifest outside of him in the manner of a divine statue. It was fully 300 meters tall and looked like a god. Xu Qing looked very dramatic as he sat on the asteroid. A terrifying aura spread off him, becoming a tempest in the starry sky. The surrounding cultivators backed away to avoid the tempest, but at the same time, they were paying close attention to the situation. Woman put iodine on her heels. You wouldn't believe what happened open. From ancient times until now, whenever an imperial sovereign became a quasi-immortal, it was a very grand occasion. After all, quasi-immortals were still immortals, and the term immortal was inherently marvelous. Although most of the people present understood what would happen when an imperial sovereign rose to a higher level, they were still riveted on what was happening. That was because watching this process would give them deep insights into what was to come for them in the future. Although things wouldn't be exactly the same, at least they would get a general idea. Sir Star Ring was paying very close attention. After all, this was the person who had served him up his first defeat, and Xu Qing had also killed him. He was very curious to see how his quasi-immortal upgrade went. The most important parts of a quasi-immortal upgrade are the 9 bursts and the immortal foundation. 9 is the limit for the bursts. How many will he get? There were others wondering the same thing, especially Zhou Jingli. In fact, among this group, no one was paying closer attention than him. As everyone pondered the situation, Sir Vilespirit suddenly said, "Ladies and gentlemen, who of you is willing to make a little wager? How many bursts do you think Xu Qing will get? Zhou Jingli, I know you're fond of him. Are you willing to put your money where your mouth is?" Everyone looked at him with curious expressions. After blinking a few times, Sir Vilespirit continued, "I haven't achieved my own breakthrough, but I do know that when an imperial sovereign becomes a quasi-immortal, they have to place their immortal embryo outside of their body and grow it in bursts. Ordinary quasi-immortals can only achieve 3 external bursts. Those who reach 5 are rarer, and any who achieve 7 are considered chosen. As for 8 bursts, well, people like that are as hard to find as phoenix feathers or Qilin horns. And 9 bursts would make you a lower immortal. What about you, fellow Taoist Yuanshan? How many bursts will you bet on?" He looked at her. 8, she replied coolly. Sir Vilespirit smiled and looked at Sir Star Ring. Sir Star Ring ignored him. Unconcerned by that, Sir Vilespirit turned to look at Zhou Jingli. 9, of course, Zhou Jingli said with a faint smile. "Now we wait and see what happens," Sir Vilespirit said with a smile. Li Mengtu frowned and was about to say something when all of a sudden he looked thoughtful. Then he looked at Zhou Jingli and said, "The number of bursts isn't as important as the immortal foundation. The bursts determine the strength of the immortal embryo, but the immortal foundation determines how far you can walk on the path of immortals. Every new quasi-immortal has to have that immortal foundation. It's the foundation for their later immortal ascension. The foundation cannot be illusory, it must be corporeal, and it can't be modeled on one's canon. Some people prepare it in advance, but some people have more complicated plans. I wonder what Xu Qing's immortal foundation will be like." Li Mengtu's words echoed through the starry sky for all to hear. Everyone responded with thoughtful looks. They all knew that the immortal foundation really was very important for one's future. Even Sir Star Ring, who had not participated in the talk of making a wager, was looking at Xu Qing in the Tempest and was thinking back to his own breakthrough. Originally speaking, he should have achieved 9 bursts, but thanks to his conflict with Xu Qing, he had been unable to complete the breakthrough in the 5th world. After going through a lot of setbacks, he ultimately decided to go through with the breakthrough on the outside, and he had achieved 8 bursts. In the end, he had died and been born again. That was when he finally achieved the last burst and perfected his status as an immortal. But thinking back to everything that happened, he was still shaken. Of course, the whole reason I picked the 5th world to begin with wasn't just because the surroundings would help me achieve 9 bursts. My real goal was related to what came after that, the immortal foundation. I wanted to follow the path of 4th true monarch. I hoped to find his remains in the 5th world and then incorporate them into my immortal foundation. So what is Xu Qing's immortal foundation going to be like? When he thought back to his fight with Xu Qing, he remembered the bell he had used. There was also that extremely sharp iron skewer. Hordeslayer and Rampart shivered in sword form, then backed up. However, not feeling very confident in their position, they backed up again. All of a sudden, they were feeling a bit afraid. Just as they did that, and as the tempest raged, Xu Qing on the asteroid emitted loud rumbling sounds. As the deafening sound spread out, the 300-meter immortal embryo that he had placed outside of himself, which resembled him in all respects, suddenly glittered with bright light. 5H12 Min, hurry up, and get those flowers out of the house. More 463,158,242. It's starting, Li Mengtu murmured, his heart filling with anticipation. The light became blinding as the 300-meter immortal embryo erupted with terrifying power. The rumbling grew louder. Then the 300-meter immortal embryo grew by tenfold. Astonishingly, it reached 3,000 meters in height, and the aura it emitted struck everyone with fear. This was the first burst. But things weren't over yet. The 3,000-meter immortal embryo let loose terrifying fluctuations again as it again grew by tenfold. It was now at 30,000 meters. Next came the 3rd burst, 300,000 meters. After that was the 4th burst, 3 million meters. The process continued and showed no signs of weakening. In fact, it grew stronger. Soon, a 30-million-meter figure struck fear into the hearts of everyone. Xu Qing's bursts are all tenfold increases. Tenfold. Normally speaking, they're usually twofold or threefold. We're only up to the 5th burst. It's only the 5th burst, and yet, he's already surpassed the vast majority of quasi-immortals. As everyone reeled, the bursts continued. In the blink of an eye, the 6th burst occurred. 300 million meters. That alone went to show what kind of reserve powers Xu Qing had built up. Everyone backed away further. Xu Qing's immortal embryo really looked like a god. As it sat cross-legged in the starry sky, it seemed holy and caused the hearts of all observers to pound. Rumbling echoed out along with the 7th burst. The 8th burst followed instantly. 30 billion meters. Although it wasn't as big as an entire galaxy, compared to it, the planets in the area were like grains of rice. The other ascendees had backed away a great distance. As they looked at Xu Qing's immortal embryo, they were shaken to the core. Sir Vilespirit was dumbstruck. Zhou Jingli's eyes were shining with excitement. Sir Star Ring's expression had not changed, but his pupils had constricted. Yuanshan Su remained silent. Everyone else felt tempests raging in their hearts. As everyone reacted with different degrees and types of shock, Xu Qing's external bursts seemed to stop. But that only lasted a moment. Finally, a heaven-rending, earth-crushing boom ripped through the starry sky as Xu Qing's terrifying immortal embryo experienced another burst. The 9th burst. The starry sky went dark. A figure comparable to a galaxy towered in the starry sky. The surrounding planets were no longer like grains of rice. They were like dust. Everyone was struck senseless. Then the galaxy-sized immortal embryo shrank down rapidly, causing a host of afterimages to linger in the starry sky. Soon, it was back to normal size, and it fused with Xu Qing's true body until they were one. This was what he really looked like. The external bursts portrayed the immortal embryo's sphere of power. What that meant was that Xu Qing's divine will had a range as large as a galaxy. Unheard of, Sir Starring murmured, his scalp tingling. Everyone else was flabbergasted. This can't be. Normally speaking, this should be completely and utterly impossible. Tenfold bursts, all the way to the limit. The ancient records don't even talk about this kind of thing happening. Xu Qing's reserve powers were obviously deep, but they couldn't make this happen. This surpasses any normal categorization. There must be other karma at play. Sir Starring had previously been the #1 shining star. He came from the Star Ring Pagoda and was unusually knowledgeable. But after being temporarily stunned, he realized that something was off. He could admit that there was a disparity between himself and Xu Qing. But the disparity shouldn't be this big. All of a sudden, he trembled inwardly as something occurred to him. It was a speculation that caused him to turn and look at Zhou Jingli. Sir Vilespirit soon came to his senses. So did Yuanshan Su and the others, and they all looked over at Zhou Jingli. They were all thinking back to what Zhou Jingli had just said. As for Zhou Jingli, he looked very excited. It's because we're in the Aurora Heaven Beyond Heaven. It's because he sowed immense karma with this place. Someone actually gave him this heaven beyond heaven. That's why this heaven beyond heaven without a lord welcomed him with open arms. Somewhere in the 4th star ring, in lands where gods proliferated, an old boat was soaring through the starry sky. It was a marvelous boat that the will of gods couldn't detect. There were 2 people in it, both of whom had astonishing cultivation bases. As long as they were careful, they could safely traverse the 4th star ring. He has it now, a gentle voice said in the boat. The person who had just spoken was none other than young Lord Aurora. Next to him was a young woman who was his wife, immortal fairy spirit Phoenix. Upon hearing her husband's words, she laughed softly. I knew it. I could tell that you gave him more than just the immortal palace. Young Lord Aurora looked affectionately at his wife. He did us such a favor that an immortal palace wasn't enough. I gave him the entire heaven beyond heaven. 1220, Green Heaven. What had once been the Aurora Heaven beyond heaven was trembling. The events that had just played out had attracted the attention of high-level entities. Streams of divine, that low-level cultivators couldn't even detect emerged from other heavens beyond heaven, and focused on the heaven that had been without a lord for many years. At the source of the disturbance, Zhou Jingli's words shook everyone, including Sir Star Ring, Yuanshan Su, Sir Vilespirit, and all the other ascendees. All of these people were chosen, especially Sir Star Ring. Whether in terms of battle prowess or knowledge, they were at the peak in their generation. And therefore, all of them were instantly able to recognize the logic and accuracy of what Zhou Jingli had just said. There was only one way to explain how Xu Qing's breakthrough had given rise to such a monumental tempest. It was a welcoming cry from this heaven beyond heaven. It was a blessing from it. That was the only way something like this could happen when an imperial sovereign became a quasi-immortal. With 9 bursts, an immortal embryo became like a galaxy. With 9 bursts like that, one had to wonder what the coming immortal foundation would be like. With such thoughts on his mind, Sir Star Ring's eyes glittered. It seemed that everyone else was thinking the same thing. That was especially true of Zhou Jingli, whose expression was one of pure anticipation. Few people understood his canon, and those who did know about it only knew what he wanted them to know. Sir Vilespirit was the only one who understood it more deeply. The reason for that had to do with the substructure of Zhou Jingli's canon. His canon was actually quite similar to that of immortal Lord Nineshores. It had to do with secrets. That said, his canon explored a different direction. It was about foresight. In the reflected history of the Aurora Immortal Palace, I had premonitions about everyone. There was one exception. I couldn't foresee anything about Xu Qing. It was as if he didn't even exist within the range of my foresight. Because of the unique nature of my canon, if I worked hard enough, I could even make it work on an immortal. Though I couldn't make any changes, I could at least struggle to see some traces. I wouldn't dare touch them, of course. Get rid of it. Urgent. Dangerous plants at home open. But Xu Qing is even more unique. There weren't even any traces of him within my foresight. In the end, I left the Aurora Immortal Palace and waited outside in the hopes of catching a glimpse of him. Zhou Jingli thought back to the moment when Xu Qing had stepped back out into the fallen immortal moors. Upon emerging, he had looked at Zhou Jingli. When that happened, Zhou Jingli didn't betray any reaction on his face, but his insides were thrown into chaos. 1. Even then, there had been something empty about Xu Qing that had struck fear into his heart. And then, just when he was about to look away, his foresight caused him to hear a faint voice. He has it now. He did us such a favor that an immortal palace wasn't enough. I gave him the entire heaven beyond heaven. Those words struck him like lightning. He had been able to tell that the person speaking those words had intentionally let him hear. They had been very thought-provoking to Zhou Jingli. And as he analyzed them, he realized that he needed to seize this opportunity that no one else had any clue about. That was why he had chosen to continue to address Xu Qing as young lord. That was why he had delivered first place to Xu Qing on a platter. That was why he had been obsequious from the moment they reached the Nine Shores heaven beyond heaven, all the way to now. And now, it's time to bear witness, Zhou Jingli murmured in anticipation. Everyone was waiting. As they looked on, Xu Qing's eyes opened as he sat cross-legged on the meteor. They were clear and full of enlightenment, so that's how it is. During the bursts, he had come to realize that young Lord Aurora had given him, not just the immortal palace, but the entire heaven beyond heaven. At the moment, he could clearly sense that the fluctuations of this heaven beyond heaven had formed a resonance with him. It was waiting for him. He looked up at the surrounding starry sky. Xu Qing had originally been planning to use his space-time hourglass as his immortal foundation. After acquiring the 9-colored ice coffin, he had considered using that instead, as it was both mysterious and extraordinary. But in the end, he had decided that the space-time hourglass was more fitting. It was a space-time treasure, after all. He hadn't even considered using the violet crystal. After all of his experiences through the years, he had come to know more about the violet crystal, but also knew that it was not something he could alter. At the very least, I need to become an immortal before I try altering it in any way. But now, Xu Qing knew that nothing else could be as suitable as the starry sky he was looking at. Therefore, his eyes shone with determination. Slowly rising to his feet, he looked out at this heaven beyond heaven, and then threw his hands wide as if to embrace it. His divine will rumbled out, filling the galaxy he was in. And from that point, he started calling out to the starry sky with the goal of taking this heaven beyond heaven. The entire heaven beyond heaven, including all of the universes, galaxies, and planets, all began to tremble. There were innumerable species, including the Heliodorans, who suddenly felt an indescribable pressure weighing down on them. And to their astonishment, they felt fear coming out of nowhere. It was as if heaven had been lost, but was now coming back. The Lord had gone, but a succession was taking place. A tide began to flow in the starry sky, starting from the edges of the aurora heaven beyond heaven and moving toward Xu Qing. As it converged, great rumbling sounds echoed out everywhere. As deafening sounds rang out, as countless species trembled, and as Sir Star Ring and the others reeled. The starry sky over Xu Qing was covered up. Dazzling and pulsing with immense pressure, a spectacular immortal palace descended, replacing the starry sky overhead. The immortal palace was pure jade, with ornate decorations. It had countless structures conforming to an ancient architectural style, and though it looked rather old and dilapidated, ravaged by time, there was nothing else that existed in this heaven beyond heaven that was more paramount than it. This was the true form of the original Aurora Immortal Palace. It represented the will of this heaven beyond heaven. It was glorious, majestic, and astonishing. The moment it appeared, the hearts of the onlookers raced, and their minds felt blank. Zhou Jingli looked elated. He knew he had gambled correctly. Quickly ducking his head down, he dropped to his knees and prostrated to Xu Qing. As the Aurora Heaven Beyond Heaven joyfully welcomed the Aurora Immortal Palace, the starry sky trembled. And then the palace turned into a spectacular beam of immortal light. It shot toward Xu Qing. It poured into his head, into his body, and into his immortal embryo. Dazzling, prismatic light glittered in the starry sky. And then a deep, rumbling sound echoed into the hearts and minds of all the living beings in the sea of stars. The immortal palace had a lord. It was Xu Qing's immortal foundation. With that immortal foundation, he could control this entire heaven beyond heaven. He had become an unheard-of quasi-immortal. Opening his eyes, Xu Qing spoke in a voice that sounded like heaven itself. "Hear my decree." From this moment on, this heaven had a new name. Green Heaven 2. 1. Xu Qing came out of the immortal palace in chapter 1184. 2. The name of his heaven takes the Qing character from Xu Qing's name and adds it to the word for sky or heaven. This has a number of implications. Normally speaking, this set of characters means clear skies or blue skies. At the same time, those two characters are part of a longer idiom that means something like Great Lord Clear Sky and colloquially refers to a just and incorruptible official. Many readers made jokes comments in Chinese like, "Oh, it turns out Xu Qing is the origin of the idiom," or something like, "Xu Qing turns out to be Great Lord Clear Sky." But there are obviously multiple layers of wordplay in the name of this heaven that can't all be conveyed in English. I originally wanted to translate it as clear heaven because it made me think of the clear skis meaning. However, later wordplay makes it clear that the meaning is green, while also referring to Xu Qing's name.